The NBA draft combine is over. The 2024 draft cycle is entering the stretch run, and it's time of chucking darts to get a little bit more optimistic and explain why the 2024 draft does not suck. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. You can call me Chuck. This episode is in the early 200s, but I'm recording a lot of these back to back, and we'll see when this one gets released. But I can tell you that the most recent episode that I've released at time of this recording is the mock draft I did with Presidente from the Strickland following the draft lottery pre-combine. So the last episode that I recorded was pre-combine, right after the lottery. We did 14 picks. Me and Prez, it was, a 2.5 hour episode, lots to sink our teeth into and your ears into if you are so inclined. So please check that out. This is going to be the first in a mini sort of series on this podcast where I talk about the areas in which this draft has some real legitimate depth. And I know that it's called a role player draft and everyone has poo-pooed it for so long. I also am aware that this is the time of year where people start to come around on classes and fall in love with players. I'm not immune to that, but I do want to emphasize that I feel like there are some very specific areas for some very specific reasons that have gone either underhyped or overlooked. And to do that with me today is one of my good friends in the space. He started scouting, at least publicly, around the same time that I did. He's been on a handful of times. I've been on his platforms a handful of times. It's Nate Grubel. He's at Draft Deeper. He is active this cycle, as he always is. His work is second to none. I'm very glad to have him back to talk about specifically players we think can star in their role in the NBA. So, Nate, how are you?
I'm doing well, Chuck. Certainly, thank you for having me on. You are correct. We talk about this every single time we do a podcast. We came into the draft media space together in podcasting and doing a lot of our written work. And honestly, couldn't be more thankful for the opportunities that I've certainly gotten. I know I've been out of the public space this cycle for the most part, outside of just what I'm sharing on social media. I've been doing a lot of private consulting work and other projects behind the scenes, but as I'm coming out into the public space a little more as we get closer to the draft, I'm thankful for this opportunity, but also just congrats to you, man, for still continuing the success you have over at Chucky Darts. You are one of the best draft podcasters in the space. I say that every single time. Your show is a must listen, all of your work must read. So I'm grateful to be on here. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. I had to dust off the microphone. I didn't know if this thing still worked, didn't know if the camera still worked, but thankfully I'm here. You can hear me. Everyone can see me. So we're going to have some fun.
Well, you are. I always like it when I have a guest on whose audio quality is better than mine because mine, I like to lean into sort of the lo-fi grunge aspect of my presentation. And so it's good to have the professional to raise the quality a little bit.
If Albert Garbage Time Gim from No Ceilings is listening, he would absolutely go against you. Maybe not this current moment in time, but there was a moment in time where he gave me nothing but crap for my audio quality and told me, Nate, you got to get a better mic. So trust me, I've certainly been down that road of needing an upgrade or two in my time podcasting. So.
Yeah, honestly, I should probably take it more seriously than I do. But the first time you appeared on my podcast, it was like I had a microphone. I have the same microphone I have now, but it was a Google chat where I had you on the phone talking into my microphone.
Yep.
That's where then we talked about like Cam Thomas and Jared Butler. Those are
Yep.
2021
I didn't
draft
know what you
guards.
looked like for 3 years. So trust me, this is an upgrade already. So there you go.
And aren't you lucky now? But I mean, like it's just it's all gravy to me, man. But I'm sure
Absolutely.
that with how popular draft podcasts have gotten since we started, I should invest a little bit more. But I also don't do this for money, so what people get is what they're going to get, and hopefully
And
their ears can handle it.
you know what, Chuck? Content's king, baby. At the end of the day, so nothing better than the content itself. So
That's right. All right. So for today, look, we were kicking around. There's one player in particular that I wanted to discuss with you when we were fleshing out this episode. And then as we got rolling a little bit, the premise that we wanted to do is talk about guys who we feel like could flourish in their role in the NBA. After all, it's called a role player draft. But when you think about what role player means in the NBA, it can be a little bit nebulous. Is Derek White a role player? Because whether or not he is or he's not, he's up for an extension and he's going to get paid in excess of 25 million a year. So I think what most people think of when they hear that term role player is not sort of a top two offensive driver. But those players, White for one, OG Anunoby for another,
Yep.
they can frequently be more valuable than some top two offensive drivers who maybe are down the hierarchy in that lane. Would you rather have OG Anunoby or would you rather have Darius Garland? That sort of a thing.
Sure.
So today we decided just to go, a little bit heavy, as you and I tend to do, by each picking 7, because I just did a lottery last time. This isn't going to be a draft where we go back and forth, but we each have 7 names that we wanted to hit as potential stars in their role. And you have the one that we talked about initially to start off sort of the germ of this episode's idea, which is Steph Castle from UConn. Now, he's interesting because he's getting love very, very high in the draft. Some places I think have ranked him number 1, I believe. Certainly he's floated around the top 3 or 4 or 5. And I think it's a valid conversation to have about what his role is likely to be in the NBA, how his role might evolve, and could he really flourish and star in his role. But it's your guy, so I will give the floor to you. Whatever you want to start with on Steph, but if there is a particular vision of his role that you have in mind, I'd love to hear it and start there. So go ahead.
So before I get into Stephon Castle, just so the audience knows, we were going to call this 7 and 7s, and I wanted Chuck to drink a 7 and 7 with me while we were doing this pod. He said it might go off the rails. I agreed. So we don't have 7 and 7s. I just have a glass of water, but nevertheless, trust me, this is still going to be a doozy of a pod, no matter what way we slice it up. So
yeah, the problem is I have a Waterloo that I've already finished. Like whatever I drink fast. That's why a 7 and 7 would not be a good idea.
Got it. So because
yeah.
Chuck drinks like a fish, we can't have the 7 and 7s on the pod. Got it.
That's right.
All right. So Steph Castle, 6'6", 210-pound wing, 6'9" wingspan, 19 years old, had a great season at UConn, 11 points per game, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, shot 47% from the field, 75.5% from the free throw line. I know we're going to break down that 3-point shot. We're going to break down the off the dribble stuff. We get all the concerns, but when we're talking about the concept of star in your role, what is the specific place within the lineup that Steph Castle is going to fill? It's going to start on the defensive end with him. And that's no surprise to anyone who's been evaluating his game, who's been studying the draft up to this point in the cycle. He is, in my opinion, at bare minimum, a 3-position defender in the NBA. I think he's going to be able to guard 1s, 2s, and 3s. Depending on the 4s, depending on who he has to go up against at that position, that might be in range for him because he is thick and strong for a guard/wing, however you want to categorize him. I still see him as more of a guard. I think he sees himself as more of a guard, but I also understand if you want to make the argument, how many times is he actually going to be bringing the ball up the floor? Is he going to be playing next to a point guard? If that's the case, evaluate him as a wing, to which point I say, however you want to classify him, that's up to you. But I see him as a 3-position defender. I see him as someone who can do a little bit of everything for you in the half court. He can screen, he can play make, he can score at the rim. I think his off the dribble scoring got a little more confident in the mid range as the season went on. He can play without the basketball. He can cut to the basket. So there's just a number of different things that you can see him doing on the court, but it's all going to stem back from his active defense, his ability to keep someone in front of him, his ability to navigate screens, play pick and roll defense, his ability to deny passing lanes, play passing lanes, create deflections. all of that fun stuff is within the realm of possibility for him. And I think he's actually going to excel at it in the NBA. To me, he just does so many different things that it will come back to the weakness of shooting. But when I'm looking at guys who I want to star in a specific role or play a specific role in the NBA, I think you and I can agree, Chuck, especially with how these playoffs are unfolding. You just want these guys to check as many boxes as possible, period. Right? As many dribble, pass, shoot, defend guys as you can possibly find. Steph Castle, in my opinion, has a good handle. He certainly can make passes for others, both in transition and in the half court, playing out of pick and roll, secondary reads. He can defend. The main question comes back to his shot. And I know we're going to unpack, and I'm sure you have your opinions on that. But out of all of the things that I said are within the realm of possibility for him to do at an NBA level, again, prioritizing the defense, is there anything other than the shot that you disagree with me on in terms of I actually don't think he will be able to do this at a good to great degree in the NBA?
No. Nothing that I think he can't do at minimum at a good degree in the NBA. Now, it's worth noting that he said at the combine, like, I sacrificed for the good of the team, not like in any sort of bitter way. He's like, yeah, that was like my role on the team. I did that. We won a national title, but I've always seen myself as a one. And not as like an alpha dog. Maybe he thinks of that as well. But he sees himself as a point guard.
Sure.
That's what he believes that he is. I think that's what he is probably selling to teams in interviews, because if teams see him as someone who can run an offense, at least superficially, then that tends to be valued more highly at the top of the draft. So I think that it's interesting because there are some players who will try to sell themselves as role players, as like, coach, you come in, whatever you ask me to do, I'm going to do it. I'm going to defend. I will, go after every loose ball. I'll work on my body, blah, 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 blah. Steph might feel that way as well, but there is, in the NBA, if you want offensive usage, like, you have to take offensive usage. It's not going to fall in your lap. And there is one of the things that I have learned over the course of doing this work is that is a mentality. You can't just assume because someone is hardworking that they will claim offensive usage in the NBA. They have to believe that it is theirs to take.
Sure.
And when we talk about Steph, with the shot specifically, I think that his willingness to take threes, I mean, it's hard, right? Because you don't want to take shots out of the flow of an offense, especially at UConn where they're so good, and especially where operating out of the flow of the offense would probably get you benched because they're so deep, right? And like Hurley wouldn't stand for any of that stuff. So you'd like a guy like Steph, who's a freshman, who was hurt to begin the year, needed to be, I think, probably pretty measured in his aggression. And so I want to know your thoughts on how you saw his sort of offensive game unfold over the course of the year. Do you feel like he maintained a good level of aggression? Do you feel as though it was sort of up and down and he would alternate between passiveness and aggressiveness? Where do you think he sort of ended up at the end of the year? What was his journey in that respect to you?
Well, certainly the journey was rocky, right? We knew that was going to be a thing. And by the way, I'm glad that you mentioned it, but it is important to note the fact that he was able to not only come in and start with this experienced UConn team that was gunning for a second national championship, but the fact that he seamlessly fit in and not only was good statistically by himself, but he didn't take anything away necessarily from this UConn team. He did everything he could to make everyone else around him better. He wasn't lost in sets. He was able to fit in within their offense. He didn't kill their flow unless he was turning down a three-point shot, which I think that's really where you want to get to. But it is important to call out this guy is a freshman, did everything that he could. He won with this team. He helped make everyone else around him better. Not every freshman in the country can come in a spot like that, in a pressure situation like that, and do that. So I do want to make sure that I call that out. But in regards to the shot, that was probably the most disappointing thing that everyone on social media called out throughout the cycle. Why is he turning this three down? Why is he turning that three down? He's wide open in the corner. Why is he not taking this shot? Swing pass on the wing. Why is he not taking that shot? He's wide open. There's no one else around him. Defense is sagging literally into the paint off of him because they know he doesn't want to shoot that shot. And he didn't for about 3/4 of the season. And then as Big East play wound down, as they got into the Big East tournament and in the NCAA tournament, you saw him much more willing to not only take those 3-point shots that swung to him, he was much more willing to create them off the dribble in a pick and roll. He was much more willing to take 1-2 dribbles inside the arc and take that pull up jump shot. And I think it was that, to me, that was more important than analyzing a lot of the mechanical stuff with his shot. Now, I do think he's made some mechanical changes and improvements to his shot that we've seen even at the combine. He was certainly knocking down a lot of open shots at the combine. I know it's just the combine, it's shooting drills, it's not game tape. I get it, but it is nice to see some of that. But when we're evaluating shooters, that willingness, that confidence to not necessarily stop within the flow, but to be able within that half second, like, yep, I know I'm going to shoot it. I'm going to go up. I don't care if it's make, miss. I'm going to take that one. Then I'm going to take the one after that. I'm going to take the one after that. So that was a transformation that we didn't need to see from Castle. The good news is I think by the end of the year, he got there and then was also self-aware enough to acknowledge it in some of the media interviews we saw at the combine. Yeah, this was a problem of mine. Here's what I'm doing to work on it and fix it. And this is why I don't believe it's going to be a problem in the NBA. So not only do I like that I saw progression from start to finish within the season, but I did like that self-awareness from him as well to realize, say, hey, I messed up here. This is definitely something I'm going to improve upon. Here's what I'm doing to work on it. Here's kind of what I'm able to show you in this environment to prove that I've worked on it. And here's my plan for it moving forward. So I do like all of that. I like hearing that from Castle. And that's a big reason why I don't necessarily see him jumping to like a Jalen Suggs level where he just goes from like below league average 3-point shooter to all of a sudden like he's hitting 40% from three in some areas on the court. But I do think he's going to get to an average mark as a shooter. And to me, that's the majority of what he needs. I don't need him to be bombing 7-8 threes off the dribble or anything necessarily outside of that because of how physically gifted, how strong he is. He doesn't have the quickest first step in the world. He's not like a Jalen Suggs level of athlete, but I think the strength makes up for a lot of it. Guys bounce off of him. He bounces off of them. He's able to withstand that, take the bump, control himself in midair, contort himself, and get the shot up and make a good amount of them.
Yeah. So we're going through this pretty quick because we have a lot of guys to get to. But that last bit that you said about his strength, I had been, I think, lower on Castle throughout most of the cycle until the last couple weeks. I went back and watched some more UConn because I can't, you can't ever watch enough UConn from this version of this team. And his there's a valid question about his ultimate NBA success because if the shot never comes together, even if he is, we like to use league average as sort of an out for any sort of questionable shooter. I think he'll get to league average. I mean,
even
league
though
average,
that number keeps going up, by the way. So.
Right. This year it was like 36, 37.
I think, yeah. Yep.
%. And that's obviously really good. Like you have to be able to knock down your shots. And a guy like Suggs, who isn't the most gifted shooter, has such insane core strength that like he can shoot them from deep. He has a very quick trigger. Like he can sort of shoot them off movement. At minimum, he can shoot them off relocation. And so, that's a guy who is now an extremely valuable player because he stays on the floor. The appeal with Castle is that enough of what he does is so good that you would not that his defense would just be so good that you can't take him off the floor. I tend to think that is sort of fool's gold to think that someone's defense is just so good that you can't remove them from the floor. Because just about any really good defender who plays a lot in the NBA has found a way to be a credible shooter. Alex Caruso is not a high usage offensive guy. His 3-point percentage was way up this year. Like you have to be a threat.
Yep.
And I think that Castle, I don't think his shot looks terrible. I think that, he from the free throw line, he saw a really, I think, notable improvement. He finished at about 75%, but his last 50 free throws, which
It's like
isn't a huge.
90% or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
it
Yeah.
was above 80. I think it was
Yeah.
between 80 and 90. And again, that's a small sample, but it's not nothing. I mean, 50 free
Mhm.
throws. So, and that was to end his season, going through the tournament and everything else. To me, I think he has a little bit of hitch at the top where he sort of uses his hands a little too much to guide the ball and let it go, but I'm not a shot guru. It's just sort of something I see. Um, but I think that he knows what the deal is, right? And he'll get
Exactly.
with a shooting coach and we'll see where it lands. What's
Hmm.
interesting to me is that strength about guys bouncing off of him. Like, it's not just that guys bounce off of him to me. It is that guys go where he wants them to go. He controls drivers driving into him so well. Like whether that's Devin Carter, who's one of the best athletes on ball in the class, or Terrence Shannon,
Hmm.
another one of the best athletes on ball in the class. I mean, both those guys, Shannon particularly, I mean, he's a 23-year-old.
Yep.
And Castle had him like a marionette in their Elite Eight game. That's the game where, the game was close at halftime and UConn went on like a 25 to nothing run and really ran them off the floor. But Shannon was getting absolutely nothing against him. And for a 19-year-old kid to be able to do that is extremely impressive against that level of
Yeah.
athlete. And so, you know, when he's ranked as high as he is, I think a lot of people are just thinking that the shot will be there, and that's fine. I think it's worth discounting his stock a little bit for the possibility that the shot is below league average. But the other area I wanted to talk to you about is his sort of, it has to do with his hands. Because as good of a defender as he is, his technique getting around screens is great. His ability to stay in front is great. His ability to contest late is great. He doesn't, he does not cause as many deflections as your typical, like, insane, lockdown defender normally would. I think he averaged less than a steal a game. And that was not a number that went up as the year went on. I think in his last like 9 games, he had 2 steals total. And for someone who would draw the best on ball assignment and follow them around screens and try to, like I said, steer them accordingly on drives, I would like to see if I think someone has sort of all defense potential, like Suggs. Suggs' steal rate was 3.5 in his year at Gonzaga. And granted, West Coast Conference, not the same as Big East, but that's like a very solid lotto pick level defensive beast kind of steal number. Steph's was under 2. Like I said, under one total steal a game. So
Are
what do
are
you
you more
think?
are you more bothered that he didn't create as many deflections away from the basketball? Or are you more bothered that him guarding someone in front of him, he didn't use like more active hands to poke the ball free, get that live ball turnover? What are you
I
more
think I
bothered
think
by?
away from the ball, I'm not as concerned about because I think that's probably a little bit of scheme about when to
Yep.
gamble and when not to with UConn. Now, Cam Spencer gambled all the time and got a bunch of steals the way that he always has throughout his college career, going from Rutgers to UConn. But it's more that I just think that, again, if you're going to say that someone's defense is their number one skill and their number one sort of calling card, then I want to see that. I really do value steals because I think they're so valuable in the flow of a game. Live ball steals that create transition opportunities. There's just no replacing them.
Sure.
So I'm bothered by it a little. I at least want to discuss it. What do you think about that part of his game? What do you attribute that relatively modest steal number to?
I got to be honest. I think his demeanor to me just strikes me as, look, I'm going to stand in front of you. You're not going to get by me. You're not going to push me off my spot, I want you to specifically make a shot over me, or I want you to get rid of the ball. I don't think his mindset going into a defensive matchup is ever, I'm going to look to poke the ball free, or I'm getting caught in this position with my pants around my ankles where you got by me and now I have to recover. And the best recovery tool I have is to try and poke the ball free, like some other guys that we know on the wing who play that defensive style, like a Thibault or whatever the case may be. He's never in those positions, at least on the tape that I'm watching, to where he has to resort to something like that. I think that's just honestly his mentality of, I am this brick wall in front of you. You're going to have to try and go through me, but I don't think you're going to be able to. So you're going to have to shoot over me. So if the end result is either his opponent is bricking a shot over him, or he's getting rid of the ball and forcing an even worse shot with somebody who has to take it late clock and just jack something up, if that's the end result, I'm okay with that style of defense. Our live dribble or our live turnovers, definitely a way to certainly add to your offense and get easy buckets in transition, especially when some things may not be working for you on the other end in the half court. Absolutely. And you want guys to be more active playmakers to generate that type of offense. I personally, though, was not bothered by it, mainly because whenever I'm watching him guard someone one-on-one or in a pick and roll action, I'm just kind of like, oh my gosh, like I'm more like in awe than anything else, like trying to get too particular about it. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I see where you're coming from. I just, whenever I watch him, I just don't feel like that's in his demeanor, that like, hey, I need to do this particular thing or that. It's, I'm just in front of you. What the hell are you going to do about it? That's my opinion.
Yeah, and look, there's no arguing with success. He played in 30 games. He started 26. In the 26 games he started, UConn went 25-1. So, and they obviously are loaded with, I think, a lot of NBA talent, but can't really, like I said, can't argue with the record. But again, you think Suggs 3.5 steal rate in college. I think Herb Jones was around that. Drew Holiday was 3.5 in his lone year. Alex Caruso, like every year, he was hovering around 4. These are the elite guard defenders in the league. And I think a lot of them, are as physically gifted or more physically gifted than Castle is. And they still, like, they did both.
Sure.
So I think, like I said, it's, again, all but one of those guys. Well, yeah, I guess Suggs and Holiday were one and dones. Herb and Caruso played longer. So maybe if Castle were, like, he's not coming back for a sophomore year, but if he were to, maybe you see that number tick up. But I notice on offense that, first of all, when he drives, like, people bounce off of him. He had a very healthy free throw rate. And a lot of it was just because he doesn't have a ton of wiggle. It was, I am putting my shoulder into you. You are not going to be able to handle it without fouling me. And I'm going to be able to stay on balance and give myself a chance to finish the play. And the whistles will come. And they did for the most part. Extremely impressive tape to watch that. But there also, I think, was some, like, even though I think his rim numbers were fine, I think he shot over 60%.
63% at the rim. Yep.
Which is good, but also in UConn's system where you can have Klingon popping out and there's so many cuts and defenses are constantly on tilt, you should get opportunities at the rim that are relatively easy. But I think that there was something of a personal lack of finishing creativity from him. It's great to do the brutally effective bully ball stuff, and I love to watch that. But I saw, like I said, I didn't see anything that made me get up out of my chair that said, like, oh my gosh, what a creative finish from Steph Castle. It was straightforward. I'm going through you, which is, again, really admirable quality. Certainly there's a place in the NBA for it. But I started to connect the dots about whether or not there is a similarity in how he approaches driving to defending drives, in which case it's going to be no nonsense. I'm not going to try anything I'm uncomfortable with. I'm not going to improvise too much. I'm going to sort of rely on my formula. And his formula is good. It's a good formula.
Yep.
Where I am unsure is whether or not it is a great sort of all defense formula. Because if it's not, and he's merely a good to very good NBA defender, then it just means that that offense has to be that much better and that much better to make sure that he's a starter, to make sure that he's getting 30 minutes a night, to make sure that he's closing games. So I guess
I no 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 I
go
agree. I
ahead. Go
see where
ahead.
you're going, and I do agree with you in that the shot is, I'm not obsessed with the shot like some people are, but
Nor
I
am I.
do
I'm not obsessed with it
but
enough.
I do agree that the offense has to be at a certain bar. Like what will be the thing that swings him from being a Bruce Brown or a Jalen Suggs versus someone who's struggling to get minutes in the NBA? It is going to be tied to his offensive output. It is going to be tied to whether he's a threat to shoot from 3-point range.
Or
So,
from Bruce Brown to Jalen Suggs. If I were to tell you he'd have Jalen Suggs' career through the first whatever 3 or 4 years of Jalen's career, he is a top 10 pick because Suggs now is that valuable of a guy.
well,
If I told you he was Bruce,
people would have disagreed with you on that one for the first few years, but I
but
digress. Never mind. Yeah.
I mean Suggs was that good this year, and I
Yes, he
think if
was.
you
Yes, he
but if
was.
you were to say that he'd be Bruce Brown up until this point, who's on his whatever fourth team, Bruce probably is between 10 and 20. If I were to tell you this guy will be Bruce Brown, and that's a real meaningful difference in a draft. If
It
someone takes
is.
that guy at 4, then you could potentially lose your job over doing something like that. So
Welcome to the 2024 NBA draft, my friend.
well, that's why we're talking about it. So, like, where do you see all this balancing out? How like do you see him as a clear-cut starter in the league? You think that is coming to him?
I do. I do. I think the two-way balance is going to be in a place to where you're going to look at him and say, this guy, the number of players he's able to defend, the number of things he's able to do on the court for me, I can't only give this guy like 18, 19 minutes a night. Like, this guy has to be like a 25 plus minute starter for me. Period. That's where I think it's going to land. That's me being optimistic on the shot coming around more than what it was this year at UConn. If that doesn't happen, then the balance does get thrown off, and we could see Stephon Castle treading some very murky waters. But I think that's probably the thing that sticks out to me the most about this 24 class. It's not that these guys can't have potential all-star upsides. It's not that these guys that we can't have the usual, I don't know, call it like 12 to 15 starter level players out of a draft class. It's not that we can't have that. It's just so many of these guys have these scary low floors to where you can easily talk yourself out of virtually any of these guys when we're talking about potential starters. And that's why, if a guy has that floor, do you really want to take him with the second pick, the third pick, the fifth pick? Why do you want to do that? I'm just buying that this guy checks so many boxes for me that I want in a starter, that I'm going to take this guy with a tie. He's been top 3 for me this entire cycle, and I haven't moved off of it. And I will tell you, as someone who lives by Philadelphia and watches enough Philadelphia 76ers basketball,
Hmm.
I wish we would have had a Stephon Castle on our team in the playoffs. I'll put it like that.
Yeah. So like what I've been talking, I've said this in a couple episodes. I've said it on Twitter. Is like with the Suggs, Holiday, White, Herb, Caruso. I call these guys switchblade guards because I think that sort of that denotes that their primary value is defensive, that they can literally switch among multiple positions while
Yep.
still giving you enough on offense to fit in. Because I think that for a supporting player, that is becoming not just more important, but literally a necessity for a team that wants to contend because you're going to have offensive guys with mega usage, and you just need players to take the point of attack and be able to switch and make life hard enough on the opposing primary options. So I I think Steph is certainly in that mold. He's been creeping up like my lottery recently over the last couple weeks. And I think it's worth mentioning number one, he is a hellacious rebounder. Like I am snatching the ball from out of my area and you're not, it's not like, this is like a Josh Hart kind of mentality and talent that he has for grabbing the ball.
Which, by the way, is becoming a much more important characteristic for wings and guards than I think people would care to admit, especially given the fact that we're seeing more of these teams pop up with these front court players like a Chet, like a
Yeah.
Mobley, like
Right.
these thinner guys who aren't these. They're not bad rebounders, but they're not dominant for their respective positions that they're best at playing. And so it's important to get those contributions from everywhere else. Not everyone has Isaiah Hartenstein on the Knicks who's grabbing what was it, 12 offensive rebounds or something crazy like
Yeah.
that the other night.
Yeah.
Like not everyone has that. So the more places you can get that contribution from, the better off you're going to be on both ends of the floor. So
Well,
I do.
the more teams play five out, the more your defensive big is further away from the hoop. So when the ball
Exactly.
goes up, you need guys who know how to track it and just
Yep.
go and get it and
Yep.
win the battles.
Yep.
So that's worth noting. And I sort of skittered past his bully ball offensive game a little bit. But if he considers himself a point guard and he is going to be taken high in the top 10, and the team's going to give him at least a chance to run point a little bit, at least off the bench or something, I do think, and this is where he has been rising, even though I have my concerns about his improvisation, I have my concerns about his shot. I think that if you are a good enough like mismatch punisher, if
Mm-hmm.
you are good enough at just backing down someone smaller than you
Mm-hmm.
and forcing like either forcing help or forcing a foul or whatever, which I think he will be able to do, then that is a point guard type that I think again could, if it's not like Drew Holiday, I think is this kind of point guard, but I think that that is a type that Castle could aspire to. Like I don't think starting point guard is off the table for him. I think he's a
No.
very good passer from what I've seen. I think his passes again were in the flow. He would do legit skips. He wasn't just a one like first pass away kind of guy.
So he rated out 77th percentile in pick and rolls, including passes, only an 8.6 turnover percentage
Yeah.
out
Like
of that. So yeah, he takes care of the ball. He makes good decisions. He can make the reads he needs to
but
in
I
that
think
play type, among others.
but I think he was still relatively aggressive within that system and within
Yes.
those reads. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think he made it work. So you see pieces where like a good rebounding, good distributing guard who can really punish and get himself to the line. I think there is starter in there. And if you're really imagining a ceiling, I think it would be something like a Holiday, which would be great. I don't know that I would bet on it all the way up in the top 3 or 4, but I bet on it in the top 10. I do think that again, you have to look at UConn's success. You have to look at the fact that he had legit physical dominance as a freshman against guys older than him who were very physically gifted, and just say, physical strength, physical talent, coupled with his just sort of headiness, his feel, his just doggedness in how he plays. I do think that is a top 10 talent, but I think it's important to acknowledge that there are little differences between him and the guys that he's comped to.
Where do you think he fits best? Because I mean, I think Charlotte and Utah could absolutely use him, who are both picking in the top
Uh,
10.
if I were to pick out of those two, I'd prefer Utah. Charlotte, I think, is okay. I wouldn't hate it, but he's off the ball in Charlotte. He's just off the ball.
Right.
So that means the shot needs to go in like and quickly, because he's not going to get the reps that I think he would really ideally want if he's there, as opposed to somewhere in Utah. I wouldn't like if you're talking about a team taking a swing on him like really super duper high, like if Washington were to take him at 2.
So that's the one that I've said, and I don't know how much positive response I've gotten to that one, but to me, if this thing really is going to be built out wide long term, like we're not talking like this team has to start winning games in 2 years. We're really building it out wide. What better wing defensive foundation do you want than him and Bilal just wreaking havoc everywhere? And then you really do get him the point guard reps and you start figuring out how does he fit in the offense at that position. You give him that runway, the ability to explore the studio space. Like I actually do like that one. I didn't want to say that one first right off the bat, but I like so if I have him third on my board, and gosh, the whole big board thing. The more I do big boards, the more I hate them, Chuck. I don't know about you. I freaking hate big boards. But like, if I have him third on my big board, that means that if I'm Washington and I have a potential hole in the backcourt that he can fill, I'm not necessarily afraid to take him that high. So I guess it all just depends where you value him and the fit and the runway he would actually have to develop with the organization. But yeah, I wouldn't be afraid if I'm the Washington Wizards.
Yeah. I mean, and that's going to have to, again, come down to individual workout stuff like that. When you say what better wing tandem would you want than him and Bilal, I would say Ron Holland and Bilal because I like Ron more. But that's not for this episode. So, okay. Anything else you want to get to on Castle, or you want to get
No,
going
no,
on the
no.
next
I
guy?
I think we hit the mark pretty well on Castle. I know we'll go a little bit faster on some of these other guys, but we did want to unpack Mr. Steph
Yeah.
since he has been a favorite of mine this entire cycle.
So one guy I will say who I've been vocal about for months as someone who I thought was very underrated, who I is now he was like a star of the combine. I think now his reputation is approaching where I've seen him for some time as Devin Carter, who's the guy that Steph, I think, like really handled very well and outplayed and helped convince me that Steph should be ranked above Devin on my disgusting, reprehensible big board. Um, Devin, Providence guard, 22-year-old, I think this spring. So he was like an old junior, but basically, a senior aged player. And he has a lot of the same stuff that Steph has, but
Yep.
he is he is not shy about trying to cause deflections. He is
No.
like a Tasmanian devil on the defensive side of the ball and is constantly forcing the issue. Like, I don't know if Providence's offense had much flow, but like he was the straw stirring the drink.
Yep.
He loves to go downhill, loves to put his shoulder into people. He has great long strides that he can really elevate off of. He's had, I think, over 25 dunks each of the last 2 years. And his 3-point shot, all of a sudden, which had never really been there, he now made, over 83s this year, which is a legit, like, if you're a shooting prospect the year before you're entering the NBA and you make over 83s, people be like, yeah, yeah, good. That's what you should be doing, you know?
So I
So
messaged you about him, and I know I've shared a little bit of skepticism, but I also shared some skepticism with my guy Maxwell Baumbach. Shout out to Maxwell. Love you, buddy. Absolute dear friend in the space, and he might get a few other shout outs throughout this podcast. But I shared my skepticism about his shot, and he said to me, Nate, he's hitting half court threes now. Like, well, he's hitting logo threes. What else do you want this guy to do? But keep going
I
about the
mean, well, it's
shooting.
because it's a weird moonbeam shot, and it
Well,
doesn't really. It's not anything that translates to the mid range because his mid range numbers are still not, very good. He shoots 65% at the rim, which I thought was very good, especially considering they lost Bryce Hopkins. The team wasn't really well spaced. He was the top of everyone's scouting report, so he did his work, and I think to me, he is like a textbook. Like this is a switchblade guard prospect, someone who will start his career coming off of the bench because he's only 6'3", but he has a 6'9" wingspan. His handle is not the tightest because he wasn't a natural point guard. Even at
sure.
Providence, he wasn't a natural point guard. But the physical talent is such that I think that with NBA space, his handle will improve and will be just fine. And he is someone like that is defense that to me, like he's blocking threes again out of his area, out of position, to start like one man fast breaks. He is electric. And that is the level of sort of defensive playmaking to me that a team will not be able to keep off of the floor. And so when I think about him, again, with NBA talent around him, uh, and being able to have relatively open driving lanes to the hoop, he is an above the rim guy. And I am not spooked off by his age because I think most of the time when someone's not in the NBA by age 21 or 22 and it's a problem, it has to do with some physical issue, some athleticism issue, which
Mm-hmm.
he does not have. And so I have said that I have him in the top 10, which is where I've got him. So understanding that again, if the shot reverses and is now, just not there anymore, then that'll be a big problem. But Where do you come down on Devin? Where do you think is an appropriate time to take him?
We don't really need to argue on him, to be perfectly honest. I've certainly come more around to your neck of the woods. I listen, he is the Anthony Melton reincarnate. He is an absolute beast on the defensive end. I think when you're talking about him deflecting and causing chaos, he it gets me in trouble because I don't want to say when you say that like he's a better athlete than Stephon Castle, for example, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
people automatically go to, oh well, Steph Castle must be a bad athlete. No,
No,
he's
no, no.
just he's not a 1 foot leaper. He's not someone like Devin Carter who's leaping effortlessly off one, slamming it home on someone, or skying to get some crazy block from behind, or that's not who Castle is. But Castle's also built like a shit brick house, and you're just not going to mess with him in that way. That's the type of athleticism that he brings
Or a brick
to the
shit house.
table. Either one, but
Either one,
but
either one.
that
Both are tough to deal with.
both are
Yeah.
applicable. So, but that's what he brings to the table. Carter's a different type of athlete, but one that, in different respects, like you pointed out, can potentially be a little more important when we're trying to project some skills carrying over to the NBA, especially if you're only 6'3". It helps that he has that Melton size wingspan. It helps that he is that 1 foot leaper. But listen, he reads the game well. He knows exactly what's going on both ends of the floor. I actually am not that concerned about his handle, to be honest. I know that he's not a natural point guard, nor do I think he's going to be a point guard in the NBA, but he's perfectly fine, in my opinion, to make secondary, tertiary reads, come off of an action, hit somebody else open. I think he's fine doing a lot of that stuff. My only main hang up with him, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. It's not just that the 3-point shot was inconsistent. Then all of a sudden this year he talked about the moonbeam mechanics. He started hitting logo threes. It's not the three ball I'm necessarily worried about. It is just the overall level of touch that I'm concerned with, right? So like the difference between him and someone like Castle, right? I wouldn't say either are these guys who are going to blow by every matchup in the NBA. They're going to get caught sometimes. They're going to get walled off a little bit. You see someone like Steph Castle able to take that bump and rise up, and he's able to hit that type of shot. He's able to hit that runner, that floater. He proved in college that he has that touch. He hit, I think, about like 47%, something like that on those shots. I don't know what Carter's percentage was, but just when I watch Carter's film, when he's walled off by someone, I don't see that natural, like those soft makes from him that he's able to convert in those types of situations. The ball hits the front of the rim. It rattles around and clanks out. Like I don't see that level of touch from him, and that's what gives me some concerns. If he's not able to blow by as many guys, if he's not 6'6", able to rise up and hit some tougher shots like a Castle, for example, that would be my main concern. Not the fact that even though he may not hit a bunch of off the dribble threes, I think he's going to be fine spotting up. I'm not concerned about him in that regard. I'm more concerned about what's going on inside the arc. What are your thoughts about his touch?
Yeah, he is, whereas Steph relies on his formula, like Devin is just chaos. Like he is not afraid to do a wild like reverse under the hoop, starting on one side of the hoop, reversing to the other side of the hoop. He's not afraid to do like a double clutch, high layup off the glass. It's weird. But at the end of the day, he attempted 240 shots inside the arc. He shot 56% on them.
There you
So
go.
I'm not like
There you go.
I'm just not gonna argue with it too much. I guess is where I'm at. And if
Yeah.
it again,
By the way, I knew it was a nitpicky thing coming in. Like that's why I said like I don't think we're really going to argue about Devin Carter. Like I see it. I see the two-way impact. I do believe it's going to work at the end of the day. And when we talked about where would you take him, at one point I was a little reserved about taking him in the lottery, but in this draft, if you really believe that someone's going to stick around for 5, 8, 10 years, just if he has a role with your team, just take him. Just take your guy. Don't let the numbered pick where you have him on your big board. Don't let that number scare you from taking a guy who can impact your franchise, make it to a second contract, and you've got him locked up long term and he's a valuable asset for you. Don't let that number scare you from doing that. So that's why,
Yeah.
like, I don't know if I take him top 5, but like, shoot, if you're sitting there and you really don't feel like there's much better options among Memphis, Utah, Chicago, I think he could fit really well in Oklahoma City. Sacramento's potentially needs a backup guard if Malik Monk walks. Like any of those teams, like if you feel that strongly about him, just go for it. Don't let the big board number, the number pick scare you off.
And you mentioned Melton as a comp, and like that is a good comp, but to me, like Melton was more of a savant kind of in terms of reading passing lanes and the timing on his hand placement. Devin's very good at that stuff, but Devin to me, and it's just really to my eye, he just has a level of like power talent that Melton did not have. And that's just like
Sure.
he just plays such a powerful game. And when you say like if there's a spot on your team, take him. To me, there is a spot on every team for him. That's I mean,
Sure.
I
Sure.
really feel that way. I'm not saying that he would start on every team necessarily, but there is a spot on every team for a guy like that. And when you look at degrees of this player, we've mentioned some of them before, but like as an undersized connector, Podchemsky, someone with outstanding touch.
Yep.
He's an undersized connector. He is a very good reader of passing lanes, but sort of on the ball and with his first step is not the most insane athlete. He gets by a lot on positioning and reading the game. He can be a defensive piece, but not really a guy to stick
Yep.
on an opposing ball handler. He's more offensively tilted.
Yep.
When I look at Carter in terms of like rebounding talent, I think he's there with Podchemsky. I mean, Carter, we haven't mentioned his like just gross stats, but he averaged nearly 20 and 9 and like
Yep.
3.5 assists. He was the Big East player of the year. And Podchemsky was the West Coast Conference, I believe, player of the year last year.
Devin Carter's numbers analytically this year were better than Pods. And that was really
And
what
so,
swung me around on that. Like, shoot, if Pods is working to this degree, if he's like an all rookie type performer already for the Warriors, then why am I having such a hard time coming around on someone like Carter? So
right. And to me, it like I would rather, as far as a supporting guy goes, when we're looking for stars in their role, I would
yep.
rather have the defensively tilted guy who I believe is good enough to hang on offense rather than the offensively tilted guy who like has to avoid the wrong matchup. And so that's a philosophy of mine that I'm taking into this draft. That's why I love Devin so much. But
That I completely agree with you, and that's really interesting to when we get to the next guy on my list, who I think did make a very good name for himself defensively, but it was in a little bit of a different way in
yeah, let's
terms
do it.
of when we talk about Reed Sheppard defending at the college level. It
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of off-ball deflections. It was a lot of reading what was going on. It was a lot of constant head turning, figuring out where can I position myself to make the best play for my team to get us out in transition. When you talk about Reed Sheppard and you say, oh, he's this awesome defender, a lot of people think you're going to look at him as an on-ball stopper, someone who's going to lock somebody up on the perimeter.
Right.
While I certainly agree there's going to be matchups in the NBA at the guard spot that Reed's going to win, he is not going to win every single perimeter matchup in the NBA because he is 6'3" at the end of the day in shoes. He only has a 6'3" wingspan. You are going to be able to find matchups to where you can, I don't want to say completely take him out of the picture, but you're going to be able to have your way with him in some matchups. I know you and I can probably agree on that. So it's not the same
Yes,
level as
certainly.
opposed to someone like Carter, who again, it's not Stephon Castle huge, but he is very strong for who he is. He has that bombastic personality. Like, you're not going to overpower me. You're not going to move me off my spot. I don't quite get that same vibe from Reed. Reed is a lot more cerebral in how he plays defense, and it's more of what he's seeing and what he's reading. But when you take into account, he is not going to be a pushover on that side of the ball, factored in with the prolific offensive output that this man unleashed on the entire country up until the very last game of the season, which I know everyone got their little draft notebooks out and wanted to take quick note of what happened in that last game of Kentucky's and write Reed off as a prospect, but you can't discount every single game of his that was played before that, where, I mean, he probably was one of the best jump shooter that I've scouted since I've been doing this. It just, in terms of like statistical output, I've been scouting. We mentioned we came into the media game together 2020. I've been trying my hand at scouting prospects since 2011. He has to be statistically like the best shooter that I've seen. I can read through all the numbers, whether everyone wants to hear all the numbers, they are insane. That's going to be his, when we talk about starring in his role, you're going to count on him to knock down every single jumper that he looks at. And you're going to count on him to at least not be a liability defensively to the point where he's going to swing you in the positive direction because of the runouts he's going to create, because of the live dribble turnovers that he's going to be able to create for you to get you out in transition. He's going to be a positive force, in my opinion, no matter where he goes. Is he going to be, I'm going to run 20 to 30 pick and rolls a game and I'm going to be this incredible maestro and I'm going to set everyone up and I'm going to be this engine? I'm not going to rule it out for him, simply because I hate putting ceilings on guys, definitive ceilings on guys in the draft period. We've seen a lot of guys overcome these artificial ceilings that are placed on them. I'm not comparing him to Jalen Brunson, but I'm just saying I didn't see Jalen Brunson becoming a guy who is going to unleash like however many strings of 40-point games he's unleashed now in a row in the playoffs and like actually lead a team to what I think they're probably going to go to the conference finals. We don't know at the time we're recording this, but regardless, he looks like a 1A caliber player for a championship contender. I did not predict that when Jalen Brunson was coming out of college. I had him as a top 25 player. I thought he was going to be a guard that was going to stick around for a long time. I don't think anyone saw that coming from him. So just when we talk about just artificial ceilings, I don't want to put that over Reed, but he's going to be someone who can make secondary decisions for you. He can play out of the pick and roll. He's going to hit jump shots off the move. He's going to hit his spot ups. You can't leave him alone. And he's going to create defensive opportunities for your team, even if he's not going to be this perennial all defense caliber stopper. Like, to me, I can't really point to an awards category he's necessarily going to be a part of, if that's one of the disclaimers we're going to use for drafting someone in like the top 5 or top 6 or whatever picks. But I can just tell you he's going to be a positive player, in my opinion, no matter what situation he walks into. I think everyone can use a Reed Sheppard just like you believe everyone can use a Devin Carter. And that's really what I mean by starring in your role.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I don't have a ton to add other than one of my persistent questions on Reed is how big a role I think he can handle and how big a role he wants.
Yeah.
There's a theory. Like, I mean, it's a real, and I'm not acting like it's like some theory in the ether. It's theory of mine, but it's shared by like lots of people. Like, there's a real chance that he becomes the best player in the draft.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
I like, I'm reluctant to go there because, again, what I tend to value is the ability to like create easy shots for yourself and the ability to tap into some physical advantage against your competition. And I don't think Reed's a slouch. You know, he had a great vertical number at the combine, even if he might have gamed it. Who knows? People have done that in the past. But he, one of the things that I do notice about him, like a physical advantage I think he legitimately has, is that I think his first step is solid. It's fine. He knows how to set it up. But when he wants to stop and rise up, like his pop time, so to speak, from when he decides to pick his dribble up to when he's releasing his jumper is very, very quick. And someone who is also a good athlete, not a great one, but whose pop time is excellent is like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Now, Shai has a 6'11" wingspan and is 6'5". And so, again, we're talking about different body types. But that ability, if you can really knock your shots down and your pop time's real quick, that can be a little bit of a separator. I want to go back and watch some more Kentucky before I arrive at a definitive conclusion on how big a role I think Reed can fill. I doubt I'm going to end up with him way at the tippy top of my board, but mean, he's just numbers are excellent. And every time he had an expanded role, more or less for Kentucky, he looked really
He was a
good doing it.
flamethrower. Yep.
And there's a great, it's the whole how much was he suppressed? How many non-spacing players did he play with? How many bigs with sort of bad hands did he share the floor with? You could go through all this stuff, but his feel on offense is unbelievable. His hand placement on defense is unbelievable. His true shooting was nearly 70, which is
I
like we're
do I
in.
do want to say one quick fact. So his when we talk I love synergy, by the way, when they use these shot quality metrics. So his overall shot quality, only 7% of his shots were considered high quality. And even on his shots where they were considered low quality, so between the 20th percentile all the way down to zero, he still hit 48% of those shots.
Mhm.
That's absurd. That is absolutely absurd.
See, but that to me speaks more to his future success as a role player because other teammates will create better looks. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that such a low percentage of his looks were high quality make me wonder if he's just going to struggle to create those looks for himself. Like just as an example, I mentioned some of Devin Carter's numbers. Reed shot 52% on threes, which is, again, just an insane number. He made 75. Good number. Devin made nine more threes, and Devin shot 38% or whatever. But the volume and the roles were different or whatever. But the volume does matter. I mean, Reed he shot 55% from two. Or remember, Devin shot 56% from two. Reed made 66 shots inside the arc. Devin made 135. Like there is, if Reed's role were bigger, his efficiency would come down. Happens to everybody. It just
So
it's just a question of where you think that equilibrium would ultimately lie. That's all.
so when I talk to NBA scouts and I talk to people who certainly have jobs that boy, I wish I had one of those. But when I talk to those people, that's the biggest qualm that they throw back at me is that he didn't apply a lot of pressure at the rim at Kentucky, period. Right? Like he made
Right.
65% of his shots at the rim, but if he only attempted was I think around like 60 of them, what does that mean about the quality of athlete that he is? What does that mean about the quality of guard that he is? If he's not penetrating and always forcing the defense to read, react, and kick and move somewhere, how many other opportunities is he creating for someone else? My answer to that is he usually ended up creating some good anyways. And to me, it's more so that he recognized that that wasn't necessarily something that he had to do or it wasn't a strength of his. So if you don't feel like that's something that's in your bag, that's something that you want to consistently go to, but you can do all of these other things really well, why would I ask you to do something? I can't say he was bad at it, but why would I ask you to do something you're not necessarily comfortable with doing? If you can pull the ball back out and find something better to do with it, hit a shot, find another teammate, by all means, just do it. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, yeah. And I mean, the pushback to those people would be like, well, the last hyper efficient guard who was defensive playmaker who didn't pressure the rim as a freshman was Tyrese Halliburton. What are we talking about? So I like, again, there's a chance that he belongs way at the tippy top. There's a
Sure.
chance. It's yeah, star in his role, certainly. It's just about what role is it going to be. Now, for my next guy, I will go to someone who is, I think, similarly, like it wasn't efficient to Reed's degree, but was good from basically everywhere on the floor. I think in the wake of the combine, the chatter about him has died down a little bit because he was one of a group of players who sort of have probably gotten some first round intel or feedback, and so he did not scrimmage. And so if you don't scrimmage, and that's the last couple of days of the combine, sort of fade to the back of your mind, which is Hunter Sallis,
Okay.
Wake Forest. And I did an episode, again, this was back in December, where I talked about Devin and Hunter as guys I really liked. Um, Hunter, first team all ACC player. I have to look up his means. I think he averaged around 19 or something like that. But he shot over 40% from three. Like Reed, he made 75. That's what he made. But yeah, 18, 4 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 78% from the line, 54% from two. So his total numbers were 49% from the field, 40% from three, 78% from the line. And if you watched Wake Forest play, they played a lot of two and frequently three guard lineups between him, Boopy Miller, Cam Hildreth. When Wake played well, they played great, and their
Mm-hmm.
offense would really pop. Um, I'll get into sort of how it was a little bit inconsistent, but Hunter personally himself self-created a lot of stuff.
Yep.
Not as a sort of absolutely ridiculous Devin Carter level power athlete, but as someone with a really good first step, good pop time himself, could stop on a dime, and he loved to rise up in the mid range. That was sort of his money shot. He shot nearly 50% in the mid range on just like jumpers. And that is not something that like you see prospects doing very often because the rim and the 3 point line are what is so heavily emphasized. What I find interesting about Hunter is that he is a little skinnier than you would imagine for someone who's not going to, he's not going to be like a primary point guard. He didn't even play that at Wake.
Sure.
And he's like 6'5". He's listed at 175, which is light. That's skinny. Rob Dillingham came in at 164 and is thought to, be emaciated. Hunter's only 10 pounds heavier than him.
I didn't realize that Hunter weighed in that low. That's
Oh, I
that's
don't know what he weighed
actually
in. Oh, I'm sorry.
insane.
This is like on Basketball Reference, basically.
Oh,
I got
got
to
it.
double check his combine stuff.
I'm gonna do that while you keep talking, but go ahead.
But you could see it when he played. Like
Yeah.
he when it was a little inconsistent, it was usually that it was that he couldn't. There would be stretches of games like clutch stretches of games, like 8 minutes and under, where he was not getting the ball every possession the way he should have been. And he would just sort of stand in the corner. And if the ball would come to him, he'd do something with it, but he wasn't forcing any action. And I attribute that a little bit to the fact that he just like the burden of scoring and driving as much as he did just kind of wore him down. And that he didn't necessarily have the juice to be the guy all of the time. And, if you're going to fill a role in the NBA, you can say, oh, well, he won't have to bear as much of a burden, but physical talent's physical talent. If you're 175, guys will go through you. If you're
Yeah.
175, it's going to be hard for you to consistently win against other guys, which
Not
is
far off. He weighed in at 179. So there you
so
go.
there you go. And I
There you
think
go.
I think there's like I've been reluctant to go all in on Hunter as like a top 20 pick because of this. That's the main issue, but he had almost a 6'10" wingspan. I believe he was like 6'9" plus,
Yep.
which is very, very good. And when he transferred to Wake from Gonzaga and he just turned 21. So he's not old. And at Gonzaga, he was used as sort of like a spot point of attack hound, someone who could like get over any pick, really get into the ball handler's jersey and just like cause havoc. But they really like his minutes were minimal. And who knows why? There's probably a lot of factors that contributed to that. But you could see how in shorter spurts, he had real talent on the other side of the ball. And he can get skinny and get over screens, obviously, at 175. But there is a question as to how it holds up. It
Right.
just is an interesting dichotomy to me between how he's been used in college and how he's shown that he can be efficient at heavily self-created looks at volume. And he also at least has defensive talent that we've seen in the past. And so if you can just sort of combine those two things in your head, you could say, well, maybe he can, be a starter off of a star who can average 15 a night and play good enough defense. And if that's that, then you should think about him near your lotto. But I have trouble sort of marrying the two in my head. So what do you think about with Hunter?
Hunter's interesting. I think the player that I've at least seen on draft Twitter compared to enough when we're talking about Sallis would be Jacoby Walter and kind of where he ended up, right? And it's funny you bring up the weight because Jacoby Walter weighs about 18 pounds more, but
Yeah,
their physical measurements are almost identical. They're both 6'5". Walter has a 6'10" wingspan. Sallis was 6'9". So you're in the same ballpark. But how much does that 18, 20 pounds help Walter versus take away from Sallis? To be honest, you can spot Walter 20 more pounds. I wasn't impressed with his defense at Baylor for what it's worth. And
Mhm.
honestly, to me, that says more about him versus Sallis because Walter didn't have the same offensive burden, not anywhere close to what Sallis had. If Sallis wasn't going off for 15 plus points, like Wake Forest wasn't going to have as much of a chance as a Baylor team to where if Walter had an off night. And by the way, I was looking, I think Sallis had, was it 23 out of 34 games or something like that, 15 plus points. I'd say that's
Yeah,
gonna get the
very
job done for
consistent.
you as a
Very
prospect. Very
consistent.
consistent. Yeah, very consistent at the volume like you're talking about. So I guess the main reservation for me going in with Sallis was he wasn't a shooter before this season. Like when I say wasn't a shooter, it's not just the percentage. Like he literally didn't take them at Gonzaga. He didn't have much of an offensive role period at Gonzaga before this season. But given a new opportunity, given a new lease on life, he exploded into a player that I didn't even realize was in there. To be perfectly honest with you, like
Yeah. No,
he
it's
quite
like the
literally
big
came
the
out of
biggest
nowhere.
like portal success story of the year, probably. You would,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So where does that fall in terms of his NBA prospects? I think when we talk about starring in your role, it's not just starring in your role as a starter. It can also be, is he just a really useful scoring tool to have off the bench to where if someone's having an off night, you can plug in Hunter Sallis and you can say, just help us out for a few possessions. Try and go get us a bucket, run off of a screen, come off of this handoff, try and just make something happen for us. He's proven he can do that at Wake Forest. How much does that weight disparity prevent him from finishing at the rim at a high level in the NBA? How much does it wall him off from other opportunities in the NBA? If the jump shot isn't 40% from three in the NBA, what does that potentially do to his chances? I don't know. And that's probably why a lot of people have him rated in that early to mid second round territory.
Hmm.
But in terms of guys who, if you're going to make a first round argument for them to at least have a role for your team off the bench, you can't knock the production that he put up in a situation at Wake Forest and one of the three best conferences in college basketball, playing for a team that actually ended up having a fairly decent year in the ACC, all things considered, when you look at the rest of the roster. So that's kind of where I fall on him. I don't have a strong opinion on him necessarily one way or the other. But if you want to say, when we get to a point late first round, who do you want to take a flyer on? I mean, shoot, he showed almost all the scoring chops in the book this year at Wake Forest. So if you need somebody to come off the bench for a role, why not?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I that's about where I have him is in that late first area. I get there's I can see a type with just about any player in the draft by this time. I've been doing it enough that I sort of see how someone is going to work in the NBA or
Yeah.
how they're not going to work. Salas is just a contradiction in a way that, like, I'm not saying that I am convinced that he will star in his role. I'm saying that he has a chance to really outproduce where he gets taken. Because
Sure.
I mentioned that pop time, man. He like there were lots of times where a defense had no real answer for him. He could get by his defender with his burst, and then he could just rise up, and you just hope he missed, and that was about it. And that type of like undeniability is just it's interesting. Now, at the end of the day, he's a guard. Guard is the most competitive position there is in the NBA. So I think bench is more likely than anything else. I just am interested to see how it all unfolds for him. And if he reaches a sort of physical prime where now, his burst and his last step, which is very good, is now coupled with some athletic gains, that's where you get into, oh, was this guy really underdrafted?
Sure.
So I just wanted to acknowledge that I think that is a real possibility in this class. If you are looking for a gem, you could do worse than to sort of dream on him. Okay, you go next.
I love how we're trying to hopefully meet in the middle somewhere on this exercise. You're starting for more of a consensus tail end, right, of the consensus big board. I'm going more like top down approach, and maybe somewhere we'll meet in the middle. I have no idea, but if anyone wants a few sleepers for me, because my name is Draft Deeper, I promise I'll have a few names coming that aren't in like my top 10. But my next guy is, and Dalton Knecht at Tennessee was one of the best stories in basketball this year, period, right? Someone who went from the JUCO ranks to a low major to being an absolute star at an SEC program. And the year that he had, it was absolutely unbelievable. I don't know if Maxwell wants me to share this story or not, but I will anyways. Chuck and Darts podcast, whatever. So he was texting me before the season even started, and he said, I'm going to have Dalton Knecht as a first round prospect. Am I nuts? I told him, no, you're not nuts. Why would I say that? Because Dalton Knecht is exactly the type of player that NBA teams want. We keep talking about these guys who can dribble, pass, shoot. Knecht, at least at bare minimum, prove that he can dribble and shoot. I know there's probably some questions about the passing. There's going to be some questions about his defensive output. But this guy was, when we talk about Reed Sheppard's efficiency, Dalton Knecht was not as hyper efficient as Reed, but he was pretty dang efficient at volumes that were insane because of the types of shots that he took. So he's not this conventional, I'm going to whip out 3 different dribble moves and break you down. It's really funny. He has about 2 moves that he goes to try and break somebody down and then ultimately get past them. But the way that he approaches offense in terms of consistently running off screens, running off movement, I have to lean into this action to create myself an opportunity to get to the basket or open up this mid-range jumper or dribble into this 3-point shot. How conditioned he was to actually fill that role at that volume, Chuck, I thought was absolutely ridiculous. And it's something I don't see a lot of people talk about it necessarily on social media when they evaluate Dalton Knecht. They just want to talk about how good of a shooter he is, which he is. The touch is real. It's legit from all 3 levels. But just what he had to do night after night after night to keep that Tennessee team in games and to help them win as many as they did, to be a top level seed in the NCAA tournament, to get to where their season ultimately was. If they didn't have Dalton Knecht, where would that team finish? Honestly, like I don't even know, because there were some nights where he literally was the offense. Like, you can go into it and game plan for Dalton Knecht, and he was still able to burn you, right? 44% of all of his field goals, shots he made in the half court, 62% on spot ups, 38% of all of his jumpers, 42% catch and shoot threes. Like, what didn't this guy? He finished well around the rim. He had 34, I think around 34 dunks on the season, 36% of all of his other 2-point shots inside the arc. Not all of them were, about only 45% were assisted. So quite a fair share of them were unassisted. Like, what didn't this guy do for you in terms of putting the ball in the basket? Oh, by the way, he averaged 21.7 points per game. Another one of these guys, he scored 15 plus in 27 of 36 games. So it was absolutely an insane season. When we talk about guys who can star in your role, you can look at this guy to get you a bucket, period. Like, I'm convinced it's not even just the jump shot anymore from 3-point range. He can get you a mid-range bucket. You can get him going downhill. He can finish at the rim. He can finish above the rim. He is that level of athlete. He's conditioned incredibly well. I've heard you use the Max Strus comp. And so I don't think that's a bad comp, by the way, but I wanted to dig into some of the numbers and actually take a look at their outputs per 100 possessions. And in terms of volume that Knecht was responsible for, he did clear Strus's bars pretty handily. He was more efficient. Where Knecht actually lines up in terms of volume, responsibility, role, was more in line with someone like a JJ Redick. And I thought that was pretty fascinating, because I've heard no one use that comp for him, probably because of the size difference. Knecht is more of a wing. He's 6'6", Measured in 212 pounds. He weighed in at the combine, 6'9" wingspan. So Redick was obviously a smaller 6'3", 6'4" guard, not as long. But Redick had, certainly the year before he went into the draft at Duke, had one of the best offensive seasons for just like a pure shooter that we've seen in college basketball. That was what Knecht compared to. And JJ Redick was, in case anyone doesn't remember, he might have been fourth. He was a very, very, very high draft pick. Like, he was like a top 5 draft pick,
maybe
I believe.
7th or 8th. I don't know. He was in the top 10.
He was up there. So if anyone has reservations about, let's say, like the Spurs look at him at 8, or the Pistons would look at him at 5, or the Grizzlies would look at him at 9, he is someone who can help any of those teams because they all desperately need more perimeter shooting, and he's going to give it to you in so many different ways. I just don't think he's one of those guys who NBA teams are going to stop incredibly easily, because he's not this, I'm going to handle all of these different pick and roll possessions, or I'm going to have all of these different things schemed up for me to where, I'm catching the ball at the top of the arc and I got to make something happen for myself. He's not one of the top 3, likely one of the top 2 or 3 options in your offense. Maybe eventually he develops more, he becomes like a third option for your offense, but coming in, that's not who he's going to be. You're not going to game plan necessarily for Dalton Knecht. He's going to feast off of what everyone else is able to create, and how defenses become tilted because of someone else. And he's going to get his shots, and he's going to make a lot of them. And that's honestly, that's the book, case closed at the end of the day. He's probably not going to be this terrific defender. Chuck, honestly, I really don't care because of the type of shooter and the type of offensive output that he may potentially have on any given night.
Look, there's no question that he can score all day. He can shoot and score all day, and he is extremely well conditioned. Look, I'm just going to defend JJ Redick here just for a moment, because Dalton turned 23 this spring, right? And Redick, I'm going to have to see what his birthday is, but he spent 4 years at Duke. So I'm guessing he was 22 when he finished. And in his last year, Knecht averaged 21 this year. Redick averaged 27 in like an era where the game was not as open.
Sure.
He also Knecht, again, in his senior breakout year, averaged 5.7 free throws a game and shot 77%. Redick, over 4 years, freshman through senior for his career, averaged 5.2 free throws a game at 91%. So I'm just saying that there are levels, and JJ Redick was very special. And I'll just
absolutely. Knecht's story is also a little bit different, but nevertheless.
It is. Yes. But like the free throw percentage is something I want to emphasize here, because Knecht, when I think about his NBA role, right, he's going to come in, and I would be pleasantly surprised, if his game underwent a lot of like evolution. Like, I think teams will identify him as someone who is more of an offensive piece than a defensive piece, but also someone who's not going to do a ton of playmaking. So you are going to like have him run off the ball relentlessly and shoot or attack closeouts, or maybe like set a screen and dive, or ghost and cut, or something. Like, just be a good piece to where wherever he receives the ball on the court in space, he can make something happen. And I think he'll be very good at that. And I think that a team will probably value that in the top 10 or so, and just take him, because in this draft, no one wants to miss. And like, that he's going to be around, which he will be. When I look at his free throw percentage in his last couple of years in Northern Colorado, it was also 75%, 77%. His 3-point percentage, for what it's worth, was, good on good volume, but this year was the year he really sort of scraped 40% on a ridiculous, diet. He just better be elite. He better be really elite, because the aspect of his scoring game that I liked the most was when he was on ball and when he got downhill. That to me was when he put defenses in like the most binds, because he has very long strides, and when he elevated, he was very tough to guard, like very, very tough to guard, hard to not foul.
The
Like,
number of guys that he blew by just using a simple hang dribble into a crossover and then that like he's just gone. Like that's it. Like
mhm.
that is noteworthy because you try and break down how many of these other guys and who could he be like. And I don't remember a guy who has a game as simple as that off the dribble, and yet they were still able to do what he was able to do. Like that usually doesn't happen to that degree. But nevertheless,
Yeah.
keep going.
And
Yeah.
so, but I like, there's not much more to say. It's just that there's going to be a temptation, I think, to have him be an off-ball player. And I think that his role demands a bit more versatility than that. That's all. And I think the defensive tape on him, it's almost like this happens to a lot of guys, but it's almost like, is he sort of like a small four where his measurements are pretty good? He's a pretty good post defender. He can elevate. I just don't really want him in space on the perimeter in the NBA. I think it's not that he's hopeless, because I don't think he's hopeless, but I think he would be behind the eight ball out there
Sure.
consistently against NBA athletes. So with sort of a slightly fuzzy defensive role and an offensive role that I think is more nuanced than an NBA team that drafts him might think it is, I just have like mild concern about it working for his first team. Might he get to a second team and they really leverage it? Maybe. But when I think about who I would draft and when, or at least how I'm ordering a board, since I'm not doing the drafting, I want to try to prioritize guys that will provide a lot of value and be retained by team number one. And with him, it's just a little more complicated. That's all. That's how I feel.
Sure. He's not a cookie cutter, two-way wing at the end of the day. He's a little more
Right.
specialized than that. 100% agree. But I
Right.
think the special is worth betting on. And that's kind of where I stand.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's just, I will probably have him in the teens. Most people probably have him
Sure.
higher than that. That's all.
Sure.
Um,
Absolutely.
okay, I'm gonna name, let's see. I've done Carter and Sallis. All group two here, just so that we keep it moving. I'm gonna go with two freshmen, one very heralded, one less heralded, but still somewhat got some love as the season went on, which is Isaiah Collier and Johnny Furphy.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this is where,
So the
I
Collier
mean,
one's interesting, right? Because I wouldn't
yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily think of him as a star in your role guy. I think an
Hmm.
NBA team is hoping that he probably becomes closer to an offensive engine than he is someone who's just, trying to make things easier for everyone else. Well, I'll put it that way.
I'll keep it short and sweet on Collier because everyone at this point in the podcast has heard scouting reports on Isaiah Collier. I think that NBA, the NBA guard pool is so competitive that whatever his role is going to be defined fairly early. I don't think he's going to go in like the top seven. So it's not as though he's going to go to a team that's going to say, we believe in you as our future point guard. Here's a bunch of reps for 2 seasons. Go, play on the playground and we'll help you figure it out and help you develop. I don't think that's in his future. I think that let's say Utah were to take him at 10, okay, because they have Keontae George, who's great, and I think is probably going to start for them next year. But their guard rotation is still very much like
Influx. Yep.
in flux. So if you were to go there, they would immediately be like, well, if you don't defend, you're not going to play. And Isaiah, doesn't have a ton of length, but again, as a power athlete, has the tools to be a really pesky point of attack
Yep.
guy against opposing ones. Like really, pesky's underselling what I think he could do. But because of that, which I think his defensive game is something he tapped into more after he came back from injury this year.
Is he also someone who you think maybe was strapped a little bit defensively? You said about this earlier, but because he had to do more than I think people might have realized for that team offensively, that maybe some of the
Maybe.
effort may wane possession to possession.
Maybe, but I also think just the first half of the season, he was just sort of in over his head all the
Mm-hmm.
time. I mean, as the number one recruit in the country, I just think that college basketball like hit him pretty hard.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
don't disagree with that, by the way. I just think that his offensive output to what you can probably go into was, I think, a lot more than maybe people may believe face value when first trying to take a look at who he is as a
yeah,
prospect. He did a lot for that team.
he did. And like as a passer, he has a lot of passing talent, even if he's got to clean those turnovers up. But when you create the passing windows that he can going downhill, you know, the passing lanes will be there for him. I'm not too worried about that. And once he settles into his role, which I think his most likely role is probably as a third guard, unless he can play with another playmaker who's bigger than him, then maybe he can start. But in his role, I think his usage, like I just see the equilibrium hitting because
Yep.
I just don't think that as a starter, like primary top two offensive option, I don't think that's in the cards for him. But I think when his usage does scale down and when his defense is prioritized, you'll see a really good, valuable player for like a really good team. That's sort of how I view it. He's still, no one goes downhill the way this kid does. No one creates like layup opportunities the way that he does. Like he is top in the class in terms of downhill power drives. So, and it's not as though he lacks creativity. He's creative
Yep.
scorer, creative passer. I mean, there's a lot to really like about him. And I just wanted to stress that I think it will find its place. That's all. And I wouldn't if a whole lottery's worth of teams pass on him and he's sitting there for Miami, I just don't say I didn't warn you. That's all. So
So,
that's
well,
how
it,
I
it
feel.
might end up being between him and Devin Carter for Miami. It could
And they
very
got
well be
Anthony
down to that.
Carter on staff. I mean, that would be. I mean,
I've seen a
I'm
lot of
just warning
popular
people.
mocks
That's all.
having the Philadelphia 76ers take him at 16. And to be honest, as a 76ers supporter, I wouldn't hate it because when you look at the young talent covered on that team, there is no one else there who you can quite make the case for is as talented and has the type of upside
Yeah.
that Isaiah
You.
Collier could
I
have,
mean,
whether in a scaled down role or if he does become something more.
I mean, you'd get the timeline arguments, but like at pick 16 to get a guy that talented, you just probably just take
You're
it.
also
But
just seeing teams get bit in the butt a little bit if they don't have those types of guys who they're developing and bringing up, and then you're able
yeah,
to turn to
and
them when you
with
do
the
make the moves to contend, the money gets swelled up in two or three, four different contracts, and you don't have that young guy down the bench who you can turn to in year three
right.
and say,
That's
"We
why they
expect more
got.
from you." Yep,
That's why it just becomes important to make sure you get a very good player. When
absolutely.
So the other guy I've got, who's like again didn't have the reputation that Collier has, is Johnny Furphy from Kansas. And I think I am probably near the like I'm not the highest guy on Furphy because I forget his name. He's at Pick and Row on Twitter,
Okay.
but he wrote for Swish Theory, making a case for Furphy in like the top 10. Not
So
enough
so
Furphy
Tyler
there.
Tyler Metcalf made a case for him. Not that I don't know if he's still there on his board. Made a case for him not that long ago at like 5 or something
Yeah.
like that. And I was like, boy, you got Furphy fever. I don't know what to do with you today, Metcalf. But
So here's what I got on Furphy. Okay. He, again, number one, wasn't a heralded recruit. If you're not a heralded recruit, that does tend to drag even your stock at draft time down because
yep.
people don't have the priors. I mean, you can
Mm-hmm.
go in history, that's just what happens.
Yep.
He didn't get, I think, D1 offers until last summer or something like that, where he showed out in some youth tournament. Goes to Kansas, turns 19 in December, so he is young even for a freshman. That is pretty young. And Kevin McCullough goes down, but he has a good sample size of both playing with and without McCullough. Book on him is, they're only using him to finish plays as a cutter or as a 3-point shooter. Where's the offensive creativity? McCullough goes down. That offensive creativity steps up a little bit, but they still don't use him in it that much. The results are spotty when he does it, but he does show some willingness to drive. It's not as though he was allergic to the idea. He shoots 80% at the rim, relatively low volume because he wasn't playing for them for the first couple months, but 80% at the rim. He draws fouls at a very high rate. I think his free throw rate was like around 40 or over 40. And when you watch him on tape, it's because number one, he has a very good last step, a bouncy last step. You know, he's 6'9", and when he goes up to finish, he's like above the rim to finish. He gets up there. And he also, I don't mean to stereotype, but like he has that sort of Australian physicality to him that you see guys like, Ingles has had, or like Luke Travers in his draft year had it. He's playing in the NBL and doing very well. But where he's just not afraid of contact. He will go right into you and try to draw a foul and scrape himself up off the floor and keep playing. It's, again, not the most creative bag, but when you're 6'9" and you can elevate and you're going to go into people, that is something that I think is really going to be able to translate. His dribble creativity, he got stripped on drives a few times because his handle's loose, but there's one thing I will stand by as an evaluator. It's that wings who are willing to handle the ball will see their handle improve in the NBA because there's just a lot more space. So it's not to say that he's going to become a great handler of the ball, but he would show some behind the back dribbles that he would chain into drives. Like, I think there is something there. He also showed a willingness to try to decelerate, like just experimenting. They're just tiny morsels here and there in his bag. And Kansas, because they were trying to adjust to this injury to McCullough on the fly, they weren't like trying to revolve their offense around that. And their offense looked pretty ugly when McCullough went down. And I thought they weren't featuring Furphy enough. It was a lot of Dwan Harris, who's not the most willing three-point shooter. It was a lot of Hunter Dickinson, who was battling his own injuries. It was
Way too much Hunter Dickinson.
A lot of KJ Adams, who doesn't shoot threes. Like, stuff wasn't well spaced. Stuff wasn't flowing very well. And, like, they weren't scripting anything for Furphy.
There were times where he felt like literally the lone shooter on the floor, right? Because McCullough was also out, in and out. Like,
but it's not like they were running double staggers for him because they knew he was the lone shooter on the floor. Like, it just...
No, they were expecting to kick it to him last resort and be like, here you go, guy. Like, make this shot, whatever it looks like. Hard close out, whatever. Figure it out.
And, like, Self's a great coach, but he came out and said after they lost in the tournament, like, I've been focused on next season for a month, which is like, that's a brutal quote. But I think that Furphy, defense... he's not a great defensive prospect. I sent a tweet today on him where I showed some, I thought, good defensive possessions where, again, like Ingles, he's very willing to try. Like, he, I think, covers ground better than it seems. Like, now, if it's straight up, he's in space and someone's going to try to get by him laterally, they'll probably turn the corner on him and get a step. And that's where he's not going to be a point of attack NBA defender. But in terms of, like, there's a quick drive that's relatively straight ahead and he has to sort of hold up and just not be embarrassed and contest late, I think that he can do that. And so you just wonder, okay, what is this relatively low usage freshman? What are they going to look like in the NBA? And to me, I think that his aggression suggests that ball handling will be a part of his game. And I think that as a very good shooter and a very good finisher who can draw fouls, and at 6'9", again, if this draft is bad, then it's bad. But if this draft is bad and that guy is in this draft, then he should be a lottery pick. If he's not, then I would think most people think this draft is pretty good, because that is, at the very least, there are intersections of NBA skills there. I just feel that, like, positional size, shooting touch, again, everything I said. So his role at the NBA might be as a bench wing or a spot starter wing, a fifth, sixth-ish guy, but someone who could potentially close games
Mm-hmm.
on the wing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is so valuable that you have to consider it in the teens or higher. And so, I mean, that's where he's going to end up for me. I have him and Connect in a similar spot, which I think most people don't.
So
But
I
that's
know
where
that
I got him.
Furphy has had his defensive qualms. I know you certainly pointed that out, but in terms of his offensive game, when I've had conversations with a few scouts in the league, my whole thing has been, and I don't want this to sound too much like a cop out answer. This is just my honest truth. I don't feel
Mhm.
like I have enough information on Furphy to handle his
I
evaluation
think that's fair. Neither
in
do
this
I.
draft,
But you
right?
have to, like, when you don't have enough information, though, you have to at least acknowledge that that could skew positive. People have been,
Absolutely.
that's all I'm
Absolutely.
saying.
Absolutely. It absolutely could. And that's why like I've long felt that he was going to be a guy who came back to Kansas and was going to be
Mm-hmm.
in next year's draft. If he's in this year's draft, he's probably one of two or three guys very quickly off the top of my head. I immediately want to bring him in for a workout and see what he's about. I want to get some time with him, get to know him. I want to make sure that the guys who I'm bringing in to work out against him are going to test him in ways that I want to see, because I just want to find out what this kid can do. I don't feel like I know enough, right? Like he hit spot up shots, he attacked closeouts, he finished in transition. We didn't get to see a lot of passing creativity outside of a few flashes. The defense was very much a mixed bag. We don't know what that's going to look like ultimately in the NBA. At least I don't feel like I know what it's going to look like in the NBA. There's so much that I just don't know about him, but the package at 6'9" is intriguing enough to where if you want to take a flyer on him in the top 20, top 25, like I'm not going to necessarily argue against you. It could end up being wrong. It could be a wrong pick in 2 to 3 years. He could end up being that bad on defense to where he's just not providing enough value. He's not playing enough minutes for an NBA team 2 to 3 years down the line. But I think
Maybe.
your argument is there's probably not enough guys, as many people think, who are a legit 6'9", who have I don't know his vertical off the top of my head. I'm sure it was probably good at the combine, but who test like he probably can athletically, who can shoot like he can. There just aren't as many of those guys in the NBA as you think. And that archetype is very valuable to buy in on at the end of the day
Yeah.
because of
He's,
what you said.
and he's
If you
got, I
can
mean,
close a game in the NBA, if you can provide value in plus minutes in the playoffs, that's really all you're looking for with one of these draft picks, right? At the end
right.
of the day.
And going to be 20 in December.
Yeah. Young
Like
pup.
it would be one thing if he played like he only wanted to shoot threes and cut, but again, watching those games without McCullough, when he got the chance, he would try. And I don't think it looked terrible. I really don't. But okay. You go for a couple now. This will get you, I think,
Yep.
to five, I believe.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'll group a few guards together. So we're gonna
Okay,
hit
let's
on
do
like
it.
my last quote unquote top guy here
Mm-hmm.
by consensus. I think a lot of people have moved him into the lottery. It would be Jared McCain. I'll hit
Mm-hmm.
on him, and then I'll also hit on Tyler Kolek. So with Jared McCain, listen, there's plenty of questions about what he's going to bring on the defensive side of the ball. Shout out to CBB Analytics. I'm very aware of the on and off splits for Jared McCain that are pretty damning. Not so in his
Oh, what
favor.
are they? I don't know what they are.
The on off numbers are actually not good. I don't have the specific ones written down, but I just know that Duke was actually better in almost any aspect except for I think it was like assist to turnover ratio when he was off the floor versus when he was
No
on it.
kidding. No
So
kidding. Well, I
yeah,
guess
you don't necessarily think that because there were plenty of games where Jared McCain was the lone wolf kind of carrying the offensive bag for them when Flip was turning the ball over and getting in foul trouble and wasn't hitting the shots, and Jeremy Roach was having an off night, and Proctor was doing whatever
but
the hell
that's the
he
thing.
was
Like
doing
with
on the court.
yeah,
And
but with Proctor and Roach, they have other guard options. So maybe that has something
correct.
to do with it. So
Correct. And they
yeah.
also, by the way, those other guard options were also expected to carry the lion's share of the playmaking for everyone else as well.
Right.
So
Right.
when you look at Jared McCain, he's not going to wow you athletically. I don't think he tested necessarily that well. I think his
Yeah.
max vert was only like 33 inches or something like that at the
Six,
combine.
6'3.5" wingspan.
Yep.
Yep.
So he's not gonna wow you in that sense. But I think if I was going to try to define a role for him, it would be fearless shot maker. And I do think at the end of the day, it's not something that every executive is going to think about off the top of their head when they're trying to put a team together to possibly contend in the playoffs. But every single good team has one guy that you can point to off the bench as that irrational shot maker. Like I'm all of a sudden, I'm going to put him in the game and he's going off as a flamethrower for 15, 20 points because he's just not afraid of anyone in front of him. And Jared McCain has that attitude. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and he is that type of shot maker where no matter where you put him on the floor, he can hit all of it. He's a legitimate 3-level guard scorer. And I think that type of guy to where you can put him in virtually any environment, you can put him in the big games. He wants that big moment. As cliche as this explanation sounds when we're talking about basketball media, it's, in my opinion, it's the honest God truth, right? Like this guy wants it and he got it for Duke as many times as they needed him to, especially late in the season when they didn't have anyone else to go to. Efficient from catch and shoot shots, off the dribble threes, efficient on runners, efficient around the basket. I think the passing was better than given credit for, even though it wasn't on a high volume. He was one of the better guard rebounders that we have in this class. He's incredibly strong. He's tough as nails. The strength, by the way, I think is the one thing you can point to. He, again, Castle's a much better athlete, but like when you point to Castle, you talk about his strength. When you look at Jared McCain, how many times did you watch Jared McCain rise up in the mid range off of his little, I'm going to bump off this guy and then still keep my balance and hit that mid range shot like that? This guy has all of the scoring weapons in his bag. And I just buy this guy to where he may not be a starter because of some of the defensive and athletic limitations, but I just think he's going to be around the league for a long time, man. And if your argument is he may not be this guy that's going to command these second, third contracts with the team that drafted him, and that's why you don't want to take him near the lottery or you don't want to take him wherever he's projected to go in mocks now, like I get it. But I want someone in my locker room who has that toughness, who has that moxie, who's strong, who doesn't necessarily sink you in other ways on the court, but the shot making he can provide at any given moment can be such a flamethrower bonus to where he can swing a game by himself. I think those guys, we don't talk about them as much. We try and look for these guys who can ideally play 30, 35, 40 minutes in a game. You don't have to worry about them on both sides of the ball. But those irrational shot makers, man, every single good team you go through who is either contending for a title or who wins the chip has somebody like a Jared McCain. And that's why I believe in him in that specific role.
Yeah. So he doesn't even strike me as that irrational when because he's so strong, he doesn't look like he's.
Oh, he had stretches in terms of, I'm talking in terms of his confidence where shoot, like he's just going for like fourth, fifth, sixth shot in a row, like not even thinking twice. Immediately he's coming down the floor, jacking up an early clock shot. And it's like, he has as much confidence that that's going in no matter how far away he is from the basket as anyone else like that. Okay. That's the type of what I'm talking about. No, he is very calculated and measured more so than I think people give him credit for, but
yeah. So there's two lanes in my head with McCain, and I've flirted with him in my lottery for a long time. He might end up there, but
I get it if he's not there for you, but yeah.
The one lane is he like a true outlier? Is his shooting talent, number one, is it the best in the draft? Flat out. Is he the best shooter in the draft? So a lot of people would say Dalton Knecht. I get that. A lot of people would say Reed Sheppard. We've discussed them both. But McCain, again, volume's low, but he shot 88% from the line. He shot 41% on 210 attempted threes as a freshman.
It's pretty good.
It's real good. And so if you think to yourself, well, this is the best shooter in the draft and he has positional strength. And even though he's not the best athlete in the world, he still shot, again, like 52% from two.
Yep.
Again, you would think if he is undersized and he has trouble creating separation, which he does, then inside the arc would be a real problem for him. But it wasn't. So if you want to really believe in this guy's touch and in his shooting talent, and the fact that he's not 5'9",
No,
you know,
he's a legit 6'3",
and he's a
and he's like 202 pounds. Yeah,
and he's really built. If you want to really believe in that, then you could say to yourself, you start to think about, you know, is there a way that this guy could start for an NBA team? I don't want to compare him to, it's not fair to compare anyone to Brunson, but like, is there a way where undersized guard starts for an NBA team with a lot of defensive talent around him and his scoring talent is so extreme that it makes sense? I think for McCain, that possibility does exist.
it does.
But it's
So
not
for the
like
record, that's going to come a lot from if he develops more in the pick and roll game, right? If he
yeah,
actually
of
becomes one
course.
of these guys who, by the way, I mean, he handled 101 attempts in the pick and roll, including passes. Again, another low turnover guy, shot well, created good shots out of those sets. So it wasn't, he's not Tyler Kolek, who was another guy I had written down who had like an absurd amount of pick and roll possessions. It was lower volume in relation to someone who is a top
And
tier
you
pick
know
and roll
what?
point guard, but he didn't sink the ship in when he got those opportunities. He wasn't expected to get a lot of opportunities, but when he got them, he didn't sink the ship. He actually helped guys out or created a good shot for himself.
And I'll extend this to Kolek. I don't see the starter path with Kolek, but I'll extend this next point, which is the flip side of the coin, which is just like, am I cursing myself if I pass on this guy? And if you get extreme enough, if you get to a Brunson level, then yeah, you're upset that you passed on Jalen Brunson. But if you're not out there and you're just a very good outcome for a guard with this dimensions, then I would still tend to think that the team that I have would be able to beat the team that guy starts on. Now, like acknowledging there is a level out there where maybe that's not the case, but I would feel good playing the odds against either McCain or against Kolek as a backup guy. That's how I felt about Kolek the whole time, which is just with NBA length at him all the time and with a team where maybe the backup point guard, the quote unquote backup point guard, is a staggered star that is operating the bench in those bench minutes or something like that, the way that trend has been going in the league. I
Yeah,
would
we
just
don't we don't have to spend a lot of time on Kolek.
well, I'm just saying that I'm giving you my rebuttal first, and then you can like just to get it out of the way.
Sure.
That's sort of how I feel about him, and to a degree about McCain, is that I feel like the trends in the NBA are probably enough to where I don't feel bad if they're on another team, if I'm a drafting like executive or whatever. So
Exactly.
that's where I'm at. But I do acknowledge with McCain that there is some special stuff there. And so he could end up making me look foolish. Like certainly could, but that's where I'm at. And I do love him like as a competitor, the way he carries himself, like
It's
love him
important.
and
Yep.
and think that he is an NBA player. It's just, where his journey takes him, I would probably not be a part of my organization unless I was picking like 18th and he's still there or something, something like someone else probably likes him more earlier. That's my point.
Sure. And you get so with Kolek, my argument for him is look, I'm not saying you should draft him super high, right? That's not necessarily what I'm getting at. But when we talk about guys who play a specific role, I do think there gets to a point in the NBA where we've lost the number of guards who can just come in and flat out just set up an offense for you, right? And just direct traffic, run things. Like there are times where there aren't enough of those guards to go around. The Phoenix Suns most famously saw that one bite them in the butt and in multiple different times this year where they didn't have the straw that stirs the drink. And he may not be an all-star, he may not be someone who's even starting for you and playing 30 plus minutes a night, but just at times to be able to come in and say, no, let's calm down a little bit. Let's get back to basics and let's do things this way and let's get ourselves back on track. I do think there is value in having that guy on your team. There's certainly a debate in terms of how high you need to draft that guy. Do you need to draft that guy? That's certainly been a topic of debate. What I will say about Kolek, though, is that he has been for multiple years now one of, if not the best pick and roll guard in the country. He's been someone who creates a lot of shots for himself and for others and does it at a very high level, except for one noted weakness of his is off the dribble threes. That's certainly been a weakness of his. But inside the arc, spot up threes, finishing at the basket, mid range, runners, and then all of the passing talent that he brings to the table. But to your point, it's not going to come in a starter's form, most likely because of his physical and athletic limitations. He will be someone who's picked apart defensively. And if he's not going to knock down a good number of his threes off the dribble and defenses go under on screens, that's going to be a problem for you. Now, I'm a little more optimistic about his shot. I also just love how competitive and tough this guy is as well. He's a rebounder. He'll mix it up. He'll get to the free throw line. But no, he's not going to have that starter swing for you. But I do think this is the type of player that I think more NBA teams wish they had deeper down their bench, and they wish they kind of had that tool in the toolbox. And if you're looking for a guy who can play that specific role for you, there's no one in this class who's better at it, arguably, than Tyler Kolek. So that would be my argument for someone like him.
Sure. And I totally get it. I told you my concerns, but I don't want to like poo-poo it. I think that's a good pitch. I do. I will, let's see. I got 3 left. I'm going to give all 3 because they all play on the wing. In terms of, and the one that's the segue from Kolek in terms of every team would like to have a guy like this because of their skill set is a guy I think we agree on, which is Alex Karaban from UConn.
Yes, we do.
I believe I've talked about him on my feed before, but in case I haven't, in case it's only been on guest spots, Karaban is a sophomore. He's 21 years old, so he's an old sophomore, but he, has been in college 2 years. He's won 2 national titles as a starter, because I believe he started last year as well. I believe he did.
Yep.
But he, when I watch UConn play, I don't think I have ever seen Karaban, maybe once. Maybe I have seen him like really make a bad decision where I'm like, that was wrong. You should not have done that on the court like one time on offense or defense. He measured very well at the combine with a 6'11" wingspan. He's, probably 6'7" in shoes or 6'8" in shoes, that neighborhood. But 6'11" wingspan, shot 73% at the rim on a lot of attempts. Again, we talked about that with Castle beginning the episode, that UConn system juices that a little bit, but shot 81% at the line last year, 88% this year. Low volume, but he made them. 64% on twos this year, made 83s, 38% on threes this year, 40% on threes last year. Like, not the most blessed movement shooter because he's not the best mover off the ball, though he's a really good cutter, really decisive. He just clearly has great touch, a great communicator, someone who I think has been well served going to UConn, good offensive rebounder, and is just a much better defender with more length than you think he's got. So again, this is a sort of thing where if I'm going to miss on a player, if I'm just going to be wrong about this draft, then I'll be wrong on, an underclassman like this. 2-time national champion who's efficient from everywhere on the floor, who has wing size, who continuously like makes better defensive plays than you assume, blocks shots late, blocks jump shots, blocks threes in a way that you are like, how did he get to that?
You know which team I think wishes they could have him today? I bet Oklahoma City wishes they could have him today. I think he could help them fill a lot of boxes that they need support with.
The just eliminated Thunder. Yeah,
the just eliminated. I actually just looked at that score too as we're talking. But
this is wild. I think they fouled PJ Washington shooting a 3 is like with 2 seconds left, and that's what the free throws ended the game.
But that's the type of power forward that team has missed all year. Another contender. I know they were eliminated earlier without Giannis and Dame for the most part, but like the Milwaukee Bucks could have used a guy like that. I bet the Denver Nuggets would like to have a guy like Kara. That I think ultimately is your point. Like that
It
guy is
is.
underrated, sneakily underrated, and he just connects so many dots to where if you're getting that guy at like everyone's talking about, like 25 to 35, you're probably like as many high fives in your draft room as possible.
And I'll mention a little thing about Karaban that I love. Again, as a like he's made a lot of threes in 2 years, even though he's a relatively low use, not relatively low usage. He is a low usage guy. He has more than anyone in the country that I've seen, he tries to like go for kill shot threes in transition. If UConn has scored a bucket and then gotten a turnover or gotten a stop and they're out and running, he is like 27 feet away, clapping for the ball, like wanting to launch because he thinks, I'm guessing, that like if I hit this three, this other team is just demoralized and decimated, like within the flow of a game. I want to take a 5-0 run and make it an 8-0 run in 1 minute where the other team goes, how are we going to come back against this?
Yep.
Sometimes they go in, sometimes they don't, but that is sort of it's just sort of a tiny thing that I think would really play in the NBA with the pace of that game and just speaks to how he plays fast. UConn was a fast team in the half court, but he is a fast player with how he processes the game all over the place. So I really like that about him. I'm going to mention my other two guys very quickly. Both are both are athletic wings. Look, Karaban may not even stay in the draft. Furphy may not go in the first round. Sallis may not go in the first round. Like, I really like went deep with this. These
You
two are
did.
even deeper. One is Nique, Clifford, Colorado State. The other is Tyon, Grant Foster, Grand Canyon. And I already feel bad because I would like to talk about each of them more, but I'm going to in an upcoming episode. So suffice to say this: both of these wings are legit NBA athletes. I hate when people say full stop because the stop has already occurred at the end of the sentence, but they are legit NBA athletes. Okay. If you watch Nique Clifford defend, it's like Steph Castle. I mean, it is a similar level of physical maturity. Now, Nique's older than Steph.
Yep.
He turned 22, I think, this spring. But, and he's had a strange college
I was
career.
gonna say different path. Different
Yeah,
path. Yeah.
different path. But when you watch someone try to drive on him, if you watch a guard try to get by him in space, they look similarly distressed. If you watch how he finishes plays, he elevates better than Steph does and gets up and can contest weak side and block guys trying to finish at the hoop. If someone's trying to drive by him and beat him to the rim, he can block them that way. And he has plenty of length to go for steals in passing lanes or on the ball. He is a true defensive menace on the wing. And someone who I think is like he played with Isaiah Stevens, who's a really good college guard. Probably
Mm-hmm.
had a case to be one of like the 10 or so like pure point guards as far as pure point guards go, best in the country for
Sure.
Colorado State. And so this was Nique's first year there, and so he wasn't expected to be on ball very much. But as a connecting passer, much like Karaban, I think that he is very good. I think that he is accurate. I think if anything, he overpasses a little bit and doesn't attack the rim the way that I think that he can, because he finished over 70% there as well as Karaban did, though I think on more of a self-created diet. Had over 25 dunks, and I think his shot looks pretty good. He shot 60% from two, 75% from three. He made about 43s, which to me is enough. So when I look at guys that every team can use, I've mentioned that I like defensive tilt that can hang on offense. That is Nique to a T. Like really good functional athlete, really strong. I think was first or second in the conference in rebounds as a 6'5" wing. I just think that the boxes we've been talking about are ones that he checks. Tyon Tyon is what I hope to be the draft's biggest success story because he is, you know, he's undergone 2 heart surgeries. He collapsed twice during COVID, and he has had as strange and long and scary a road to this moment as can be. There's a time where it didn't seem like he was going to play basketball again, period, because his body wouldn't allow him to. But for
And
Grand Camp,
not to make light of it, but he plays like literally like there could be no tomorrow. Like that, he leaves every single thing on the court. And yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And he had something like I think he had about a 5 block rate and a 3.5 steal rate, something like that. I'll confirm it, but it was for Grand Canyon, not the same. Yeah, 4.8 block, 2.9 steal. It's for Grand Canyon. He is 24 years old. He turned 24 this spring. That sounds bad, and it is, in traditional draft history terms, but Dalton Knecht, who's going in the lotto, turned 23 this spring. There's only 1 year difference. So I Tyon, when you watch him play, um, is just basically a different level of athlete
Yep.
than every single team that he played this year, including Alabama in the round of 32. He just was the best athlete on the floor every time. And he's not the most polished offensive player because his shot form is wild. He made 33 threes, but he is almost aligned sideways to the basket when he shoots. Or pardon me, he shot 33%, made 53s. But where his physicality comes up in addition to those block and steal numbers is that he made 210 free throws. 210. And he attempted 280 of them. And in his last, I think, 7 games, when we're getting really down the stretch and into postseason play and into the NCAA tournament, he drew 11 a game. 11 free
Yeah.
throws a game
It's a
because
lot.
no one could stay in front of him. Now, like, he can still ball watch. He can, get back cut. He's not as good of a rebounder tracking the ball as I would like him to be. He's not bad, but he's not dominant the way I would like him to be. So I could see how he doesn't get drafted. I could see how maybe he's a deep second round pick, but this is in the if I'm going to miss category. If I'm going to miss, I would miss on someone who overwhelms opponents to this degree. Like he pops on every single game that I watch. So that's why when I think star in the role, I don't know what Tyon's role is. I don't because I think supporting NBA players probably have a level of polish and dynamism with how they shoot that maybe he doesn't have, but I don't
I
care.
don't think sometimes he knows what his role is all
There you go.
on the
But
floor. But
if it's as simple as, oh, we need someone to guard, I don't know, DeMar DeRozan. Well, not DeMar would kill him because DeMar's timing based. If we need someone to guard who's like a physical downhill attacker, I don't know, someone really good. If Tyon gets drafted onto a team, I think that he could do a passable job guarding really good NBA players and has something to offer on offense. And so, maybe it's not until he's 26 or 27, but that doesn't, who cares?
so
So that's my point. There's real NBA stuff to his game with that degree of athleticism, and I just would take it. So, Tyon.
I can totally see him going undrafted, coming into summer league, absolutely wowing someone sitting in the stands at summer league, being like, "Why isn't this guy on anyone's roster? How didn't anyone draft him?" He
Mm-hmm.
gets his chance in the G League. He if he shoots it in the G League, doing all the other stuff that he does, I can assure you at that point someone would absolutely call him up. Like that seems to me like if I was going to bet on how he would see NBA minutes, that's probably how I would bet it would happen. But nevertheless, I mean, you're trying to make the point that it shouldn't get to that point. He should just get drafted. He should just be on a two-way contract
Right.
by the end of the night. But if that doesn't happen, I do think one way or another, because of the type of athlete he is, there's probably a chance that he's going to find a way to see those minutes. It might just take him longer than some would care to admit. But I think he's, especially in the NCAA tournament, he had a lot of people buzzing on social media. There was plenty of conversation around him. Like, people know who he is, and I don't have enough information in terms of drafting him. I just, I'm sitting where I am. I don't have enough information, but yeah, it's definitely not out of the question. It's good deep cut by you.
Guy, I mean, in those two NCAA tournament games, I hate to do the small sample size thing, but in 2 games against St. Mary's, no joke defense, and Alabama, he drew 30 free throws. 9 stocks. He averaged 25. Sheesh. Anyway, go ahead. I'm out of words. Go ahead, man.
So my last 2 guys, my first would be I'll mention Jalen Bridges here out of Baylor. He's been someone who has gone very much so under the radar up until, I want to say, about a few weeks ago, when some major media draft names like Kevin O'Connor at the Ringer, Jonathan Wasserman, guys like that started moving him up their boards. All of a sudden, he's into this early to mid second round territory, and he has good outing at the combine. Honestly, tested well. Had some good performances in terms of, I think, the second scrimmage game. He was hitting the open shots, had some deflections, some steals. Is one of those guys who you're not thinking about him at initially with a first round pick, possibly like a late first round pick, top 35 pick, but you evaluate what he did at Baylor in terms of being probably honestly, he might have been their most consistent player all year at Baylor. Scoring 12 points a game, shooting incredibly well from range. And that's really what you're looking at with him, right? He finished well at the rim. He was able to attack closeouts, take some guys off the dribble. The process looked good. Even when he got some pick and roll opportunity, 26 pick and rolls, including passes this year, watch the tape back on those. He actually handled those well. But to me, it's all about the spot up shooting. It's about the movement shooting. It's the fact that he has the type of touch at 6'8" that an NBA team wants to bring into the building, right? How many of those guys do you want on your team? The answer is the limit does not exist. So that's really the biggest pitch on him, is that he can defend multiple positions. I wouldn't call him a lockdown defender, but he's certainly one who understands where he needs to be. He understands how he needs to approach each possession. And to me, I think he's going to shoot the crap out of the ball in the NBA. I wouldn't call him like a top 10 shooter in the NBA, but I think he's going to certainly outperform more than people would care to admit. And then the last guy I will bring up is someone who keeps dropping down consensus boards. I can't understand why. To me, it's Tyler Smith from the G League Ignite. I have had him literally dancing between spots 9 and 11 on my board this entire cycle.
Okay.
And I haven't.
Okay.
I have Chuck. He's 6'10", 7'1" wingspan, 19 years old. Was Ignite's most consistent player all year. And you might look at the tape and say, well, it's because Nate, he probably only did like 3 things on tape that you're actually evaluating from game to game. And to that, I say, he understands the role that he's playing on the floor. He's a stretch forward. He's not trying to get in anyone's way. He's not trying to do too much on the court. He's going to provide legitimate shooting touch at 6'10". He's going to be a backline help defender. He certainly needs to improve in terms of defending in space. He was heavy-footed at times with Ignite. But listen, this guy, in terms of shooting the ball, 12 forwards in the G League between 6'10" and 6'11" shot 6 or more three-point attempts per 100 possessions last year, and actually knocked down his percentage or greater. One of 3. He was the 3rd highest percentage in that group. This is a fun fact for you, Chuck. Can you guess who those other 2 players were?
Absolutely not. No.
So DJ Wilson was one. That's a little bit of a shocker. The other
former Milwaukee Buck.
The other was a favorite of ours from last draft, who we thought should have been Mr. Lotto, Leonard Miller.
Was
the other one. Yeah.
Love Leonard.
And then 24 forwards in the NBA this year per 3-point attempts per 100 possessions. Again, similar category. He would have ranked, I believe, 9th in that group if that was NBA level production. Some names to note: Kevin Durant, Nikola Jovic, Michael Porter Jr., Davis Bertans, Dario Saric, Jonathan Isaac, Wendell Carter Jr. I'm not calling him any of those guys. All I'm trying to say is his archetype of shooter at that size with being able to shoot off the dribble, being a catch and shoot guy, being a pick and pop guy. Those guys aren't necessarily growing on trees in the NBA. And if you can find one in the draft on a rookie scale contract, you should probably draft him. And that's why I've had him as a lottery level prospect all year. Some of the other concerns about his game aside, because he's young. I think he's going to get better defensively. I think there's plenty more to get out of him in terms of rebounding the basketball. He's probably not going to be a guy who moves the ball well for you. Like if I was Oklahoma City, for example, he's a project type player, but he doesn't necessarily fit their style of play. If I'm like Utah, Chicago, New Orleans, Toronto, Cleveland, like why am I not looking at someone like him? Because I think he could bring real value to their organization. So Tyler Smith is my last potential star in your role. Stretch forward, baby. Keep it short.
Okay.
Keep it simple.
Okay. So I'll say that for Tyler, I do like him. I've had trouble ranking him. He's in my first round, but I have trouble placing him
Sure.
just because that when you mention his archetype of guy, I actually think there are fewer guys who occupy that role sort of in the bad way, where unless you feel very optimistic about his ability like to put the ball on the deck and attack and finish, I don't see many power forwards who are so like perimeter oriented unless they're like cutting and finishing a dunk. It's sort of like what we talked about with Furphy, except I see the aggression in Furphy's game,
Sure.
and I don't know if it's necessarily there with Tyler's. And I think the
He didn't do it at high volume, but there were certainly some moments where he was able to put it on the deck, attack, finish,
okay,
pull up one or two dribbles off a mid range around the free throw line, knock down those shots. It's there for him. It just wasn't expressed at high volume, but also I don't think that was what G League Ignite was ever going to ask of him. They had
I agree.
literally no shooting on the roster. They needed him behind, behind that 3-point line. But
And
I see your point. Yep.
so like a guy that he has sort of reminded me of, because I almost think that if he, especially if he's 225 pounds at age 19, looking to where his body might go, a guy that I could see him being similar to is Jalen Smith, who, you know,
Okay.
has like a legit career, has a guaranteed contract with the Pacers, has gotten, I think, I don't know if he is banged up now, but certainly was a part of their rotational year going into the playoffs. And I think that that is, if he can play backup five, like legit backup
Mm-hmm.
five, and I mean, and G League and I didn't really prepare him much for that. But if
No.
there's if that stuff is in there, then absolutely I could see him returning value to a team. It's just how well
Where
do
do
you
you
play
take
pick
him?
and roll
Yep.
defense? How well do you rebound? You know, that sort of deal. But he is another one that has like confused me. I tend to worry about guys that heavy in space on the perimeter. And unless there's a lot off the dribble on offense, I worry about it being like just missing multiple lanes where there's going to
Sure.
be someone else who's like a quote unquote undersized four, but rebounds really well out of their position that takes his minutes or something like that. So
And
that,
he's a project, and that's why he's not going to go anywhere near where I have him on my board, for example. That's why he's going to go
right.
late first round, early second round. That's just the reasoning behind it. But if you're confident in your development structure, you have a plan
Mm-hmm.
for him to bring him along, and then 2-3 years, you're looking at a guy who's not just a rotational player, but he's good enough of a shooter. He's bringing enough defensively. He's a transition threat. He's doing some stuff off the bounce to where he could be starting next to a big, or to your point, playing backup 5 minutes on top of starting next to a traditional center. You're finding ways to utilize someone who is that good of a shooter. No one's going to block his shot. You're always going to be able to count on him in multiple ways from behind the arc. He's providing value as long as he's cleaning up some of those areas. If they're question marks, sure, but I mean, how many of these guys are you finding in the draft at the end of the day?
Yeah, I also think that his hands-on defense are a little underrated. Like even if he gets beat, he's pretty good at like the wraparound sort of behind the back poke Like he just seems like a
He's
pretty
he's good
intelligent guy.
recovering. He's more like
Yeah,
an end to end kind of guy. It's when he has to move laterally is where his feet can get a little heavy.
right,
I feel
right.
like that can probably improve just given how run jump end to end coordinated that he is. But yeah, his hands are absolutely underrated in terms of poking the ball free, recovery, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And as far as Bridges goes, I like Bridges. I've liked him most of the year. My only thing with him, and it's actually kind of similar to Smith, because Bridges is like a heavy guy as well. I think he's easy like 215, 220.
213 is
Um,
what he at the combine. Yep.
there you go. So he to me is someone who you mentioned that he defensive tape was like solid, not outstanding. He's more of like a forward defender.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yep. Yep.
where I keep going, Nique, Clifford, Steph Castle, Devin Carter, I like guys who are like really good point of attack that I count on guarding up and really bothering the handle of bigger guys, as opposed to a guy like Bridges, who I think can hang on an NBA floor, but it's really against sort of strength-based drivers, because then if you get him against a really talented ball handler in a mismatch, then he's in trouble. And so that's where my preference lies, but I think there is a place in the NBA for him, like as long as the shot continues to go in and he rebounds really well, which I think he probably can do.
Yep.
So yeah, I like him as well. But I don't want to rush you, but we've been talking a long
No,
time.
no,
So,
yeah, we're good.
okay. All right. All right. There's another 14 players, baby. I think there's only a couple overlap from my last episode. So, for a deep draft, that's what you got to do. And who better to talk about a deep draft than Draft
Draft
Deeper?
deeper. There you go.
So, thank you very much, Nate. Anything else you want to hit on before I let you go?
No, this was an episode that needed to happen. I'm glad that we got the opportunity to talk at length about the draft because this is probably one of only a few opportunities I'm going to be doing something like this cycle. So any opportunity I can get, always down to talk hoop. But I think the most important thing is you and I both saying this draft does not suck. It's
It
just
doesn't,
just
baby.
just because there aren't clear all stars at the top. There's no Victor Wembanyama doesn't mean that there aren't role players littered throughout this draft that playoff teams probably wish they could have drafted. When we look back 2, 3, 4 years from now, they're like, dang, we really could have had that guy. He could have been on this cheaper deal. He could have been playing minutes for us.
Yeah.
And now we're stuck without the depth that we need to win because that's the biggest thing, man. You can't just build a team with three superstars and then go, fishing out of the trash at this point and
Yeah.
anymore in the NBA. You need a solid 8, 9. Certainly when we're talking about regular season, solid 9, 10 guys. We in the playoffs, you need 8 guys that you can count on start to finish.
Well, and you can tell the Phoenix Suns that when they come calling, because they need to learn that lesson.
Yeah,
But
they're probably listening. Someone's probably listening to this podcast. Be like, "Yep, we're not going to hire that guy. That's fine." But
oh man, thanks so much, Nate. You obviously can afford to be choosy with when you make your appearances, and I appreciate obviously that you graced me with yours. So thank y'all very much for listening. Follow Draft Deeper. Thank y'all for bearing with us. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.